Okay, yeah, I think we can get started. I am ridiculously excited to have Wesley Burt here. He is one of my earliest art heroes. I I remember I have like sketchbooks from when I was younger, just trying to pour over his work, figure out what makes it tick. And so it's pretty cool and surreal to have him here today to do some critiques. Um, I want to talk a little bit about why I started Underpaint Academy. I've had quite a lot of students who have felt like dissatisfied with their art education, and seeing just students who have like who go to schools and then they wind up with portfolios that look like everybody else. And I feel like that is not the best path forward professionally or personally. So I really want to like provide an alternative. And also just having like a community like this is super cool to have everybody kind of tune in and have a place to see like a working professional give their thoughts. I think that's like it's not an easy thing to find now. It used to be a lot easier. It used to be forums. There used to be, I don't know, it was a little bit more accessible. So I feel like, yeah, I wanted to be able to hopefully, do some more of these and have a place where, I don't know, I can feel like a little bit of an art community. Cool. So, yeah, Wes, do you want to, I guess before that, I could talk like Underpaint Academy, class actually started yesterday, and there's still seats available to watch the classes. And I'm hoping to have like a spring term after this one. But yeah, if you want to check out the website and see what's available, I'll post everything on there. And yeah, so Wes, yeah, do you want to tell us a little bit about like your background and yeah, tell us about
Yeah,
yourself.
of course. Yeah, thanks so much for having me. Yeah, it's really cool, and I'm excited to be part of the Underpaint Academy. My background is mostly in traditional drawing and painting. I grew up drawing and just doodling stuff in my head, drawing from books I was reading, just all kinds of stuff like that, and led into kind of a fine art sort of high school period, and then building a portfolio to go to art school. And then art school for me was also traditional drawing and painting. And throughout that whole time, I was looking at more illustrative stuff too, and imaginative drawing and concept art, kind of stuff like that. And kind of had that on the back burner while I was doing kind of traditional drawing and painting training. And eventually was able to kind of turn that into a work form and what I could really focus on. And so I've been working now for about 20 years, a lot of video game work, and then into film for like the last decade or so, mostly just film work.
What are you working on
Yeah.
now?
So right now I work at Marvel Studios, and there's a variety of movies and shows, and I kind of work on a good chunk of it. Not every title, but quite a few of them. We'll get to either work on a little bit, kind of dabble in it, or work on one or two in particular a lot more. It sort of varies with our kind of time frames and who can kind of work on what.
All right. Have you taught before? What's like your background with teaching?
A buddy of mine had a small atelier in San Francisco years ago, and it was called
Safe
what
house.
was it? Yeah, Safe House. I can't even think. He changed the name a couple times too. Yeah, Safe House Atelier. Carl Dobsky ran that, and I taught a concept class there for maybe 3 or 4 years. Kind of a weekly concept class with a small group of students, and would set up a project that was much like working on a professional project, where in that case I acted as sort of the art director and would give them feedback weekly and sort of figure out what people were working on, and just really set it up as much as I could like an actual job, so that they could get that experience going right into working after the school.
Cool. Do you feel like the industry has changed at all since then? Like have you seen kind of the progression? Do you have any thoughts about that?
I think there's more smaller kind of schools and different workshops and things happening, which is really great because you get that kind of one-on-one time with people actually working on stuff.
Yeah.
And it's difficult. I understand, like myself, it's difficult to actually teach a dedicated class. That's why these little workshops are more enticing because I can still kind of interact, and
Yeah.
I just can't kind of like dedicate a weekly sort of thing right now.
Do you have any new stuff to show?
Yeah, I was putting together a folder. Let me share my screen. Uh, yeah, so I was gathering a bunch of stuff up because especially with the Marvel work, we don't get to show stuff for so long, sometimes years after we work on it. And I think recently we've been getting more of like the floodgates have opened on a bunch of projects, and
Right.
we're getting to show stuff again. And our art books are coming back out, so I've been able to post more things. Like art book wise, I just did this cover earlier this year for the Loki art book, which I have a bunch of the Loki stuff in this folder too to kind of go through. Oops. Yeah, so this was a fun one. I'd worked on the show itself almost 3 years ago, or more than 3 years ago at this point. And then earlier this year, as the art book was finally getting to kind of come back up, they needed a cover for it and asked me if I would like to do the cover for it. So I was just jumped on that opportunity to kind of revisit the project.
What was like your general process for this? Like, did they like, and how important, I guess, likeness is super important. Like, when do you get that kind of thing approved?
Yeah, likeness is crazy important, especially with the Marvel stuff. You have to get approvals from all the talent, whether it's them or their managers or whoever.
That must take
Uh,
forever.
yeah, that's like baked into the schedule. So I mean, I had about a week to do this. It was a really tight deadline. Just, I don't know what, something got lost in the wash there, and I had about a week to do it.
Right.
Even though there was still probably another month or so they went through the likeness stuff, but the image itself kind of had to be done at that point. And then I did a bit of likeness revisions and stuff later on. But like for working on something like this, I knew I only had a week, so I had to expedite the process. And in most cases, I'd like to draw and sketch out a bunch of thumbnails. But for this one, I had to kind of do a slapdash approach where I gathered images of all the characters that I liked, and then almost like a I had a separate file open, and almost like a cutout montage. I just wanted to like place them around
Yeah.
and form the composition that way. Basically, like old school reference of like cutting stuff out of magazine and then like placing it where you want it to be and
Right.
kind of
Right.
looking at it for the reference. I actually have the folder open right now. I can show
That'd be
some of
awesome.
that. Yeah, it's I gather a lot of imagery, a lot of from the show, or like official images, references and stuff like that. And then like this is kind of a big style reference I kind of put together, stuff that I like and things that, just felt like the vibe I wanted to pull from a bit and just kind of keep me in that headspace a bit.
Yeah.
I'd already been looking at a lot of Austin Briggs when I worked on the show itself, so I wanted to kind of bring that approach back to working on the cover.
I love all this like golden age stuff.
Yeah, and a mixture of like, fantasy illustration, classic illustration. Like I love like Noriyoshi Orai, the Japanese illustrator, the Tommy Lee Edwards, bunch of different people here. And then yeah, kind of made my big mash of images, and then once I had the kind of the composition I liked, I had to quickly move into rendering and painting.
Do you have like
And
the sketch that you did, the composition sketch?
I don't, but along the way I made this kind of,
Oh, cool.
it doesn't really give you much here, but it just shows that I kind of worked through it like kind of in a piecemeal way, and then
It's
kind of came back through.
kind of like the draw the rest of the owl thing.
Yeah, this is like a week right here going by really fast, but
Right.
I don't have much beyond that. And I think I can only really show the final because that's the only approved thing. But that gives you kind of the approach of like how I thought out like a complex image that I have to do in about a week, which is very different from like the day-to-day stuff I'm doing, which is a lot of character work, occasionally like keyframes.
So that's more of so this was more like illustration, and the day-to-day stuff is more actually designing things.
Yeah, exactly. And I'll show some of that here. Like these are kind of concept pieces, and then some of that back cover actually I was able to repurpose some concept art into the image, just to kind of expedite it further.
There's a question: how much of the character costuming and stuff is done by the time you do a big illustration like that? I'm assuming that's already all set.
Yeah, so that big illustration, the show's already done, it's been out, and I'm referencing the actual finished stuff. Now we're jumping back a few years before that. This is pre-production, where there's only a script at this point. And in most cases, I get to read the script or an outline, and I have a good idea of what's going to happen with the characters, the kind of storytelling, what's the overarching themes. Any kind of information like that is super helpful when I approach the initial designs. And then something like this will go in front of the director and producers, and then they can kind of look at it and say yes or no, or give feedback on, if they were picturing something different, or combining different elements of different sketches. A lot of this Loki stuff, though, was really exciting because I was able to kind of just do quick approaches, and they were really responding to all the first pass stuff, and it kind of went straight through to the final.
Do you enjoy the early previs stuff more than like the marketing, or do you have a preference?
They're just really different. I mean, there's stuff that I like about both. The early previs is just so much fun because you're the visual writer at this point. And I just love like reading stuff and then drawing what I pictured in my head. Like reading a script, I just sort of watch the movie in my head and try to pull from that. And then you have the opportunity to go through a lot of different iterations and things like that, and explore different solutions. So that's just really exciting. And then illustration, you're doing a bit of that, but the image itself is so much just a singular story in one. You have a different approach for like painting like magic cards or like marketing illustration and stuff.
Is it common to do like wear both of those hats as one artist?
I mean, I know a handful of people that have kind of worked on both. I don't know that it's super uncommon. I know there's a lot of concept artists that don't do illustration though too. And then there's a lot of illustrators that don't do concept art. So there's a mixture. But I've always kind of enjoyed dabbling in different things. And I think, if that fits your personality, then that's great. And some people want to be more focused on one thing in particular.
How long would a character design like this take?
So this was one of the first sketches for this character, actually. Here, yeah, this is like the first pass on him, way before any casting is done, and maybe like a day or two I'm spending on just loose sketches, kind of finding references and things that I like, and kind of letting it all gel in my head, and then maybe I might be working on a few characters at once here, so I kind of jump back and forth, and then you cut to a while later, then we've actually got the actors cast, and then we're making like fine little detail changes of like, maybe they want to change this circle here or add some pleating, and then I'm thinking about like shoes and stuff. At one point I had him like barefoot, and then they want to see like some of these different hat ideas that are from the comics. So all in all, maybe like 3 or 4 days to a week on a character here. This one was pretty straightforward because it's mostly textiles and less of a complicated kind of suit. If we jump to something like this, to get to this point on Eternals took months. And we did months and months of exploration of what these suits would look like. And that's where it's on the extreme end of how much time goes into it.
Do you get like multiple? Do you get multiple artists working on the same designs? Like you'll do something, and then someone else will kind of add to it and will get passed back to you.
A little bit, not so much. Yeah, that's occasional. It's more that in the early process, before a look has been determined, we might have multiple artists tackle the same character just to kind of have that shotgun blast of like, here's a bunch of different takes on it.
Right.
And then sometimes like one aesthetic will sort of solidify, and like on Eternals, I had kind of come up with a suit aesthetic that then became across the board something that like Ryan Meinerding also did one, and then Keith Christensen did a bunch of the costumes as well, and then we were all kind of working from the same aesthetic that kind of came out of 3 or 4 months of exploration.
Right.
And this is some newer stuff. This is for the Dungeons and Dragons movie that's coming out in March, where I did a lot of character. This is myself, but someone else worked on it too later. I don't know which visual effects company tweaked it. That's mine back there. On the art book cover will come out too.
Did you get
But
used? Sorry, go on.
oh, I was just gonna say on this one I did a lot of character designs, but also did a ton of these more rendered. They're not storyboards. They're technically keyframes because it's sort of one-off illustrations of
Right.
different scenes. But tackled most of the movie through rough keyframing, which is really fun to kind of focus on all the storytelling.
And you don't have to worry about like color. That would be somebody else's.
Yeah, some of these I did take the color. There were a few where they wanted to see it roughed out a little further. But in most cases, I could kind of stop right at this point where it's gestural and
Right.
yeah, loose to kind of get the scene across. But yeah, when that comes out, it'll be exciting because there's a ton of stuff for that. It was a lot of fun to do, and the story is really fun, and hopefully a good movie. I'm excited to see it.
Is it still weird seeing your designs on the screen, or did you get used to it?
It's really weird, and a lot of time there's like so much. There's been so much time in between it, so that when I see it in marketing or stuff, I'm like, oh yeah, that I did work on that. That's I've been busy working on other stuff that it's kind of left the front of my mind there. It's weird when you see it on like buses or billboards. Like the Eternals stuff was
Right.
pretty crazy because that's just such like granular little detail stuff that I
Must be
had really
weird.
like
Yeah.
gotten in, and yeah, and some of the broader design work, they're not always one-to-one. They get the vibe across, or like the summation of a design comes through, and but in that case it was sort of a one-to-one design from this painting to the actual suit and all the CG stuff.
There's a question. Is there a difference in level of polish you'd recommend for a junior concept art portfolio versus what's actually required on the job? My guess is that like you should probably shoot for like highest level stuff. What do you think?
Yeah, it varies too. I've had stuff get through with very little polish. I've had stuff get through that needed tons of polish. It depends on the character, the project, the producers, the directors.
Yeah.
It's always different. Different people working on stuff. Like something like this is like super loose, but this does the job. For this particular case, they just
Right.
needed a breakdown of like shapes, and then this goes to the costume department. They're on a rush timeline anyway, so like I had done a more illustrated painting of this character, and then we needed a kind of a breakdown. So I just very quickly, this is not even half a day, try to break down a sketch with everything.
So probably having like
Uh,
a variety of problem solving on display in a portfolio.
mhm. Yeah, and that's the thing too, is because you need to have things, even when they're rough and loose, they need to be readable, because
Yeah.
directors and producers are going to want to look at it before you spend too much time on it, and just to keep the process going. So like all this stuff here is what I present in a first pass. It's looser drawing, but enough of the information is there that it's readable enough to make decisions from. And then if it is something that is liked or approved or goes into revisions, then I can continue to polish it.
Yeah,
And
something I always liked about your work is like there's nothing that's ever distracting from the idea or the design. Like that's always kind of the primary focus, and there's the spotlight is like on the idea and the problem solving.
yeah, exactly. Yeah. And that's the fun of the job for me too, is it's problem solving. There's literal problem solving
Yeah,
of
this is a
how do you
good
make these
example.
like foot wings work. And like something like this, I'm going back into. In college I only took a semester of medical illustration in college, but it was a really fun course where we drew from cadavers, and I had to learn all the insertion points of different muscles and all kinds of stuff like that. And then it's funny because that comes back around years later, and I'm like, oh, I can do this. I've done this in a class form where I use transparencies and
Right.
drew the musculature and bones and everything. And yeah. I think that's the other fun thing about concept stuff for me is you never know what's coming next. The job is always changing and you're always pulling from different things, which is kind of like the fun part. I enjoy being that kind of sponge of just watching or reading things all the time and never knowing when something like might come back up as a form of reference or like start point to kind of go from.
So there's a question just now about references. So you're saying like basically your whole life is like reference gathering, like staying interested in things.
Yeah, it's something I inherently do. And I think that lends itself to the job really well. Anyone who's inherently like enjoys going on like Wikipedia deep dives or just watching like YouTube for hours of random stuff. And it's funneling that into the work and as a form of inspiration and not always like the one-to-one kind of like, oh, I'm going to draw a tank. I'm just going to only look at tanks. You want to look at other stuff and kind of figure out how you can do your own spin on it based on your own lived experiences and interests.
Right. Yeah. Yeah. Because like design is design. You can get inspiration or some kind of idea from, it doesn't matter like what the subject is.
Yeah.
Everything kind of applies to everything. At this point, will you pretty much like, will you do like specific reference gathering beforehand, or you'll after you get a brief, you'll
so
dive
I do a bit of both. I have like I'll show you real quick. I constantly just save images, not for anything in particular. Like this is just a giant folder I'm just saving stuff into every day.
Right.
Anything I see or like, oh, that's cool. That's like, oh, that's weird, or like interesting forms or poses. Maybe it's like random anything that kind of strikes an interest in me where I don't know what this would be used for, but maybe someday there's something here that I'll work from, or like color palettes, interesting designs, or like textiles and stuff. It's just all over the place. And so this is just one giant folder with like thousands of images in it. I think this one is only like a year old and it's got like 2,400 images or something. And then so I'll go there and I'll kind of go through and pull things that I might feel fit a certain project I'm working on. But then I'll also do specific reference digging for a character or illustration or scene. And yeah, some combination of that.
I think that's like, it seems like there's not ever like a typical process, because there's every new problem like needs a new solution. So you can't kind of just reuse the same kind of thought process every time.
Yeah. Yeah, exactly. And you want to find an interesting take on it. Like here was something for Loki, the TVA, the Time Variance Authority. They're sort of like, as you see them longer, you're like, oh, this is kind of a fascist organization. So this was an approach on the soldiers where it's like being very overt on the fascism of the design work. But then I wanted to make a weird spin on it where the camouflage here is actually like a textile based on cubist and abstract sculpture. Just something that takes that familiarity but switches it up a little bit into this kind of sci-fi world. I think I have more of those here. This was a fun page of all the different denizens of the TVA, just early passes. This top section here, I even tried to draw the characters as though like Austin Briggs would have drawn.
Yeah, I can see
if they had hired him to be a concept artist, like what would his concept art look like? So that was kind of a fun approach.
And that was from you, right? I'm assuming you didn't get like any direction.
No, that was just me. Yeah, that's the fun of the job, is to kind of like find those things and then people will respond to that. They enjoy it, or there was
I think like anytime you can bring something that you're passionate about into it, like even if you don't recognize the reference, you'll pick up on the excitement.
Yeah, this was years ago for one of the Transformers films. This character got cut, but they were going to have a Leonardo da Vinci Transformer robot. So this was a keyframe I did, but before the keyframe, I did a design and I wanted to look like old Da Vinci drawings on paper, and they really responded to that kind of idea.
So the presentation makes like a really big difference.
Yeah, it is. It's if it goes in with the idea, that's the whole thing is you're selling ideas too. And in
Yeah.
addition to something looking cool, it has to do more than just look cool. There needs to be story and reasoning for your decisions. And whether or not the movie goes into it, it makes it more believable to an audience that there is a backstory to a character, or there's a reason why they're wearing what they're wearing, or it tells you something about them in a way that isn't spoken.
Did they give you that movie set in that previous one? And you
This one is they told me a location. This is actually like a combination of a bunch of photographs of the
oh,
location and then painting the character into it. So this would be sort of the scene where the characters walk in and see this, and then he turns to the camera, and you get the first reveal of his face. And then he's sort of like a character that would give an exposition dump, and that's sort of his whole role. But then they cast Anthony Hopkins for the movie, and they're like, "Why would you have a robot do your exposition dump when you can have Anthony Hopkins do your
right.
exposition dump?" And it made sense to just cut him at that point. Let's see, go through. Let's try to find some of the stuff that I haven't put up anywhere. I don't know. These are in the art book, but this is for Loki. This is a very different thing I don't get to do a lot of, kind of cartoonier. These are all sketches for Miss Minutes. That was a fun one where we kind of knew how she fit into the story, and that it was sort of a riff on the kind of DNA character from Jurassic Park,
Right.
talking, cartoon character that talks to the characters. This is some really early stuff, just really figuring things out story wise of what's going to happen.
Do you ever struggle with a fear of failing when you get a brief? Is there pressure?
Um, I don't really let myself go down that path.
Right.
You kind of have the other. There's just two different directions. You can also see the opportunity here of like, well,
Right.
there's a lot to explore, and I try to stay on that path when I can. I'd say that the more, I think the more problematic side is when I read a brief and I'm just not excited about something.
Yeah.
I think
Yeah.
that's where it's like an issue.
That's the hardest thing because I would much
Yeah,
rather like have something where it's like, oh, this is so cool. I want to do justice to this idea. And
exactly.
that's like home where the nervous energy comes from versus just feeling nothing. It's the most difficult thing.
Yeah, if you don't have a way into it, then
Yeah. Yeah.
it's kind of just running against the wall for a while.
So yeah, I think that like I think seeing a fear of failing as like an opportunity that like or at least like a good sign that you really care about something, you can kind of reframe
Mhm.
it positively.
Yeah, and going along with that, if I'm interested in it, I know that at least I'm going to be excited about what I'm doing because I'm having fun. And
Yeah.
if it doesn't land well, or people don't respond to it, then well, that's fine. They want something else. That's okay. I mean, I'm trying to please myself too here, and usually like that's kind of what first and foremost, it's always for the story, and then how can I make that interesting in my own way, or like what do
Mhm.
I think is interesting about the story.
There's a lot of questions about like overusing reference.
Mhm.
Have you ever found that you'll get too deep into a reference rabbit hole, or like how do you like start having faith in yourself and kind of transforming the reference?
um I do like to draw a lot without reference first, and then grab reference later,
Yeah,
and then you make the reference apply to what I've already drawn.
exactly.
Yeah, and I think that it keeps it feeling free, and like I'm kind of determining everything, and I'm not
Right.
a slave to the reference.
Yeah.
That like Loki cover was a different story, where like this is almost entirely like trying to match reference, but then finding a way to do brush work that makes
Right.
it interesting. Yeah, different colors and stuff.
Are there ever situations where there's too many people giving feedback? It's kind of like a too many cooks in the kitchen.
Oh yeah, that definitely happens. Uh, and you kind of just have to sit back because they're usually above your pay grade, and
Right.
uh, let them kind of figure it out. And then oftentimes that eats up time, and somewhat the next person down the line is gonna not be happy, which is difficult.
Yeah, sometimes there's like impossible situations.
Yeah, and so much of film stuff is on a very timely basis because you've determined a release date, and that means the train is moving, and you're building the tracks in front of you. And if you're slowing down this process, then how much time is the costume department going to have to actually make it, and before like day one of shooting, which is already on the schedule, all that stuff. So it's a different thing than like video games where you can kind of come back around and polish up character assets later, make changes later. In some cases in film you can, things are digitally altered a bit, or there's digital characters, and that can happen more in the post sections, but it's a little more of a set timeline.
Do you ever still do any work for games?
I haven't in a while, just because I've been mostly with Marvel and then Paramount the last 6 or 7 years. So I haven't done any game work in quite a while, but I do miss working on games. That's a lot of fun.
Here's a good question. What sort of artwork do you do on personal time when you're not working for a client, if any?
A little, I haven't, yeah, the little bit that I do is doodling. I have an iPad, and I do like to sketch on the iPad a bit. And then I've got some sketchbooks that'll doodle in. And then I've got different sort of characters and stories and things to kind of play around with. So it varies.
When you're designing, do you prefer starting with a silhouette or line work? I'm assuming it's like it depends on what the problem is. Will determine what the process that you use is.
Yeah, definitely. Yeah, it depends on the character. Yeah, a lot of these, it's a character that has lines and is on screen, so it's a bit different. A character that you're only going to see as silhouette, you probably approach a silhouette. If it's like a character in a mask or like kind of background imposing stuff, you kind of have to know when a silhouette is the most important part. In a lot of these cases, I'm drawing the character first with line work.
I like this idea. How do you decide which way to horizontally flip the character for the final thing? Are they going to be facing left or right?
Yeah, that's funny because yeah, sometimes I start it one way and it ends the other, and it's just a kind of a personal preference. In some cases, it'll be done because we kind of read the images left to right.
Yeah.
As Westerners, like this read left to right for me. But then on some, if it's like a character that is right-handed and they're holding a weapon, I want to make sure that still is correct.
So it's kind of it's similar things like when you're designing, it's just a feeling thing. It's like, does it feel right?
Yeah, and I do like flip the images constantly while I'm working on to correct things. And then we'll come back to kind of like
Right.
a canon sort of point of view on it.
Do you listen to music when you work?
I do. Yeah, mostly when I'm starting the drawing phase and figuring stuff out, I don't listen to a lot of stuff with lyrics just because it can be a little distracting.
Right.
But once I kind of move into a solidified design or framework of something and it's becoming more of like render mode, then anything goes. I'll have podcasts on, music, movies, a little bit of anything and everything. I don't know if you guys want to, we can jump into the other stuff if you want to,
Yeah.
or talk
So
about any of these
we've
particular
got
projects.
we got like a few more questions. Did you say you have some more
Yeah,
projects?
I could talk about any of these projects, or we can jump into kind of doing critiques on stuff on the submissions.
Cool. Yeah. If you want to like flip through some more stuff, there's a few more questions, and then after we get through
Hmm.
these, we can jump to
Of course.
that stuff.
Yeah.
Okay. Okay. See, do you think working with art makes you lose any of the fun of doing art by itself for its own sake? Has it ever removed any of the passion?
Um, no, I think I get a lot of the same enjoyment out of doing a lot of this stuff. And I think that when I'm not working, I mean, I just have other interests too that I want to use
Yeah.
time towards. So yeah, I really enjoy working as like a commercial artist. And it does like fill a lot of that kind of desire to come up with ideas and draw and paint. Yeah.
I've heard like sometimes people will say, oh, character design is too competitive, or like whatever is too competitive. Like, do you think whatever you're most passionate about, you should just do anyway? Because like eventually that's going to come through. And then if you're doing work, doing what you already enjoy doing, you know, it's going to minimize the danger of like burning out and losing passion.
Yeah, I think I mean with this stuff it's more like you're making other people's stuff, which is what can be a little draining.
Right, right. I think
And yeah, I think that's where people want to find like the boundary of like, well, that's when they go and work on their own stuff.
exactly.
Yeah, and I definitely feel that. I understand that sentiment for sure. Like this is some like a few of these like Star Wars things are just me having fun because I enjoy like Star Wars stuff and want to do my own little weird Star Wars pieces of like a guy in a back room with a ping pong
Right.
table.
Yeah, probably like
Um,
the more you cultivate like the personal stuff, you can bring it into the next project.
yeah, in some cases it's maybe because I want to experiment with like the apps on the iPad or experiment with some different brushes or techniques, or maybe I just want to unwind and do some figure drawing or something instead.
Ruben says he's been following your work for years, and I especially love your old Moleskine sketch pages. I find that digital paintings tend to look way too overworked, but you and Justin Sweet, Craig Mullen, some others are able to maintain a painterly outcome. Do you have any advice on how to achieve that?
I use the stuff that feels right to me. I don't know if that's like advice. I just if a brush feels right to me, I stick with it. If it's got kind of like a mixture of sketchiness to, I don't know, interesting texture to it, or like all this stuff is just me having fun with the brushes and at the same time as like drawing and figuring out a story idea. I think that's part of it, is like finding the workflow, whether it's in Photoshop or Procreate or whatever app you're using, finding the tools that um kind of keep you in that realm.
Right.
Yeah.
Let's do one more question and we can go into
Yeah.
how did you practice concept art when you weren't working for somebody? Like, what do you design when you want to be a concept artist, but you don't have anyone, and you don't have anyone giving you a brief?
Oh, I mean, you can do whatever you want. That's where I feel like if you want to, maybe it's a book you're reading and you want to just sort of
Right.
visualize it, or maybe it's your own, maybe you don't know what to do, but you don't want to do someone else's written words. At that point, just give yourself like start writing yourself. You don't need to write a whole book, but just write a
Yeah.
paragraph or write a handful of descriptor words of a character you have in mind. And the second you start writing down a little bit, you're gonna get the juices flowing and you're gonna start making decisions. And when I've done classes and stuff in the past, that's where I'll have people start, is write down like 5 words about this character, describing their attitude or like their kind of aesthetic, or what is it you want to achieve. And the second you kind of get those bullet points, then you can kind of move in that direction. And then if it's your own project, maybe you start there. And as you're working on the one character, you start thinking about a backstory, where they're from, and then you start fleshing out more and more, and it's like a snowball.
Yeah.
And you can keep going. And that's the thing, is I think people get discouraged because it looks daunting at first. But if you start small and kind of build, like keep building upon it and stacking, it gets bigger. And by the time you've done a bunch of it, you look back like, wow, that's like a whole fleshed out world or group of characters.
So you start somewhere
Yeah.
small and it snowballs. Yeah.
Mhm.
I think like
Yeah.
working on, like, if I get inspired reading a book or something, that's probably the most fun I've had, like, as an artist, is just, oh, I really want to visualize that, and you try it, and it's like, it's pretty great. And you
Yeah.
don't get anyone telling you no with your ideas.
Yeah.
Whatever you want.
Totally. Yeah, and I think I was doing that as a kid, not realizing that that was what people did as a job. It wasn't until I was like 13 or 14 and I saw like the Art of Star Wars books that I was like, oh, people actually do this for work. Because I was just drawing characters, making up stories, or like drawing characters from books I was reading.
Cool. Yeah, I think that was really helpful. Yeah, do you wanna go into do some game overs?
Yeah, let's do that. All right. Yeah, so there were a bunch of submissions, and I think I'll do some paint overs on some and maybe talk about some as well.
Yeah.
Uh, yeah, there's quite a few, and I do want to try to tackle as many as I can. I think
And if anybody sees their work on the screen, you're in the chat, let me know. You could ask questions to Wes as he's working.
start down here, kind of work my way through. This is really cool. I like the kind of chalk texture in it. Just as like fine art or kind of illustration approach, I think it's really interesting. My main like critique would be maybe the initial ground paper is too dark, maybe, or you're covering up too much of it. I would maybe let that, like that kind of dark purple, maybe let the negative space breathe a little more. Like you don't need to cover every section of the image. But I really like what you're doing with the different palette and building form and light with a kind of unconventional approach. It's really cool.
That's what I was thinking too with the flowers, like it's kind of an even distance between the face and the lamp and then the flowers.
Yeah, everything's in the same sort of shape. And if you kind of vary the scale of shapes, or just like I don't know, I just feel like there's negative space that could be taken. You could take the opportunity of using the negative space more. It's sort of like that lost edge sort of approach to like where do you need to show us stuff and where do you need to let it kind of be
Right.
ambiguous and let the person's imagination fill in the rest.
And it's interesting. It's like when you're doing a composition like this, you're thinking about the same tools, I'm assuming, that you would be doing when it's just a character, like on a background.
Yeah, exactly. And that's what's fun about the kind of realistic concept art is you're still using all the same approaches and a background of image making. Let's see, this is pretty cool. I like the color palette here. I think if this suffers from one thing, it could use more drawing in its underpainting stage or planning phase. I feel like you probably really enjoy painting, but you're maybe jumping into the painting side too soon. And I think if with a tighter sketch or underdrawing, I think this could be a lot, like we would take it even further. And things like, the scale of this helmet here feels really narrow, and I don't know if a head would fit in there unless it's like a stylized character. And that's all stuff that you kind of can plan out in a drawing phase. And then once that's locked in more, then the painting stuff kind of breathes right through it, which is a good approach. This is really cool. This is really nice, like as an illustration sort of piece. Strong kind of graphic elements. I feel like it just needs it feels like it's maybe 85% there and just needs some finesse at the end of things like jump out, like this arm feels very blocky and flat. which doesn't mesh with some of the rest of it, which is you're turning forms, but in a fun kind of stylized way. I think something like this too, because you're working digitally, I think you could play around with different layer properties and layer effects on it and get some interesting color results that way. Something that kind of bumps it one step further. I think it's just it's grasping at trying to find its sort of finished look. And I know that's what you're asking. And sometimes just experimenting for a while. It's digital, so you can always go back. You can save iterations. So take advantage of that and experiment.
Sometimes just like looking at what you did for a while and not painting could be helpful too. Like sometimes when you're painting, your brain kind of turns off. There's so many other things you have to think about.
Yeah, like in this case, if I were at this point, I would, it's illustrative, but it's also kind of leans into for me, I would lean into the realm of cinematography, and that's another thing where I keep a reference of just all like just movie screenshots and stuff, and I like that for like color palette and atmosphere. And that's something maybe you kind of go there and think, well, I want like a different color palette. I've set up the framework here, and I can use the properties in Photoshop to move it in a different direction.
You think like when, say like a painting is 80 or 90% there, like that one, like sometimes you making something more rendered or specific, like isn't going to do it. Like sometimes that it doesn't get all the way to 100 because it's about like the underlying idea might need something to convey that a little bit better. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Like,
Yeah.
like who is this character? Like,
Mhm.
where are they? Like maybe something on the wall could.
Yeah, you something you latch onto, and then
Yeah.
that's your kind of like pulsating driving force to take it to the finish. Whether it's maybe, I mean, in this case, maybe it's something about like right now, like the face is there, but it also doesn't it's not necessarily like the primary element of the image, and maybe that's where like you use the rest of the image to direct us to the face because you want to tell us about this character. Because right now the face is competing with just strong graphic shapes.
Yeah, like I think that like the design on the leg is really cool. I think the face is really cool, and then other areas don't seem to like, you've got like those two, and I feel like something else to kind of bounce between them.
Yeah. Yeah, it's a cool one. I think it's one for it's where you kind of get lost in it and you'll find the solution as you mess around with it.
You ever work on a painting and it's like the work that you did didn't take it there? You look at what you did the next morning and it's like, okay, that wasn't the solution.
Oh yeah, absolutely. I don't like submitting stuff at the end of the day.
Right.
I like to let it sit overnight and look at it the next day and then submit it whenever possible. I want to look at it with like fresh eyes, or like illustration stuff, especially for Magic the Gathering. If I can not look at it for a whole weekend and then submit it, that's the best, because then on a Monday I'll look at it like, oh, I want to change this real quick. I'll change this. And I'll even just pull the image up and I'll circle a bunch of things with like a red pen.
Yeah.
I want to change this part, this part, this part, and I'll give myself a game plan. And then for maybe the next just 45 minutes, making little changes that make me happier about it. Maybe the other people will notice it, but for the most part, it's looking at it with the fresh eyes and yeah, finding a point where I like it a little more.
So this is
Better.
this is not like a point A to point B thing, like where you can throw on music and it's like, okay, I'm going to do the finishing stage now, and it's like, because I remember I used to think that's how it happened, and then it just wouldn't, and I would get very frustrated. Like I feel like I'm doing something wrong because I'm trying to render and I don't know how to do it. I think once I realized it was like it's more about solving a problem,
Yeah.
it made a lot more sense to me.
Yeah. Struggle with the anatomy, character's head. I mean, I think what what Emily here is saying is it all is working really well. I think it would what would take this a little further is texture and defining the different elements as different textures. Everything right now feels like it's made out of the same material. And it's all kind of like a soft, like plasticine kind of like texture. Like if you were through brushwork, I mean, I'm not saying you have to render every scale, but through the way you render a crocodile or alligator, you can get the texture of its scales reading differently than the texture of like this canvas or whatever texture of the wings going on. Even the way the light is done here is kind of done in a uniformity that is the same everywhere. There's that kind of soft brush happening. So I think experimenting with some different brushes and maybe doing studies of textures would really help you here.
You probably add like some specularity too, like if you made the gator wet and like really popped out the
Yeah.
highlights.
Yeah, and then a little bit of palette stuff. You've got everything kind of in the character here in the branch. They're going, the dark is the same sort of brown, and then it goes to this sort of same value hue range. And aside from like the T set, everything is sort of in the same color range. So I think finding different sets of colors that accompany each other, and then it doesn't have to be a whole different palette, but they can each be their own little mini palette, and maybe there's some overlapping elements, but they each kind of end up in their own local color, but different reactions to like green light or shadow. But otherwise, it's drawn well. I think it's really successful in the approach here. I would maybe move like the way this arm is holding this light is framed like so perfectly against this sort of dark element. It also doesn't read as depth quite as much.
It's happening with the snake too. Like you could overlap the light over
Yeah.
the snake over the branch. And right now they're like avoiding each
Mhm.
other.
Yeah, and that's like there's just a great principle in drawing. Put things in front of things to have depth stack more. And I think if this branch were in front of a wing or other elements, maybe we don't need to see this foot here. Maybe some tea kettles are blocking it, or um, anything like that helps sell the depth more. And I think also just the anatomy of the arm here doesn't quite tell me where the shoulder to elbow is in spatial reference to the viewer. Like, is it just like a parallel, or is it like coming towards the camera a little more, going away from the camera? Like anything like that would help sell this arm holding the lamp a little more. And then design wise, I feel like the wings are inconsistent in terms of the bones. And you've got kind of the pointy one here, but then it is a different thing happening on this wing. And I would just want to make sure that that's like a decision you're making, or like, is there a reason for them to be asymmetrical in design, or is that an afterthought kind of thing? Because that's something that a viewer is going to look at and start having questions about if it's not like overt in its decision making. And then in the future too, I would maybe do more sketching to find, like, maybe you did a bunch of sketching for this. I don't really know, but I would, in something complicated like this with multiple characters and multiple elements, doing a lot of rough sketches of arrangement is really helpful. And that helps you think through a lot of those problems that are going to happen later. The more and more work you do, you know, going into something like, oh, this is going to be an issue down the line, and I want to circumvent that a bit in the early phases, in the sketch phase of how I want to approach it. So this one, the goal is to paint more simply and efficiently. Cover piece. Advice on value groupings. Well, yeah, this is a tough one. So to express things more simply and make it look finished without relying on hours of rendering and halftones, that's where you have to decide how do you simplify something? Do you paint every single facet and turning of a form, or do you let's see, approach it? You know, there's a really good thread that there's a guy, Greg Smallwood, a comic book artist, had a great thread on Twitter recently about an approach that he did for his recent graphic novel, and it's all about simplifying. It's yeah, this is this thread here, talking about, you know, when you use flat color panels, when you use rendering, where do you use line, and you know, you kind of get that through going through the motion of experimenting and finding an approach to it. If you jump in and just start rendering, you're just going to be rendering. So you kind of have to figure out the methodology of how you want to do it. And like he's talking about here, he's looking at different references and approaches where it looks rendered, but it's, you know, flat line or flat colors in combination with some rendering.
You think a lot of that has to do with like drawing accuracy, like just getting things the right size in the right place with the right amount of the size of the detail to compared to the big forms, like that's going to sell something without any.
Yeah,
right?
100%. Here we're back at Austin Briggs again here.
All roads
Great
lead
drawing, and then this like abstract, like large shape here, but it reads perfectly because the gesture of it and size and placement in this unknown room all works. We don't even need to see the rest of the room. We just know based on its that being next to this person here, we know the space is going back and that there's a floor plane here, even if we don't see it. So yeah, I mean, that's something that you would have to experiment with and do that for quite a while, then come back. Right now, you're approaching this image because you've just been doing a lot of painting and a lot of rendering. And to undo that a bit, you have to, maybe the best way is to experiment and try different brushes and force yourself to only stick in drawing for a little while and see if you can do flat rendering and still make it look correct. And like Devin was just saying, the accuracy of drawing would help it perfectly.
Yeah, I think this one like all comes down to the drawing. And like you talked about like the floor not even being there, but you had the cue for your brain of like where the feet are placed in space and perspective. So it's like if you figure out the right thing to show, that's going to do more than like specifically describing the wrong thing.
Right.
Yeah, these Austin Briggs examples are like a masterclass in that.
Yeah.
I think it was a similar problem too of like the shapes are all avoiding each other. Like the brim of the hat is fitting into the arch of the back, and his head is avoiding her hand in like the same kind of echo.
Yeah, and then this kind of mountain is like perfectly
right.
fit into this space here. I'd be curious, like I don't even know if these are all on different layers. Like that's one way to kind of jumble that up a bit, is if you have your different elements on different layers, you can kind of move them around a bit, shuffle it up in flat planes. And that's the benefit of working digitally. Like I would, if this mountain is a different layer, I would immediately like bump it over, maybe play with like stretch it, skew it a little bit, even turn its opacity down more, let it fade off even more. Yeah, and then I think that this roof here isn't really doing anything other than telling us where this is happening, but I think it could be done in a much more interesting way. Yeah, this one it's a tough one. You want to figure out what is the moment of the story? What are we gleaning from it? And it's kind of unclear, like each of these characters sort of like I don't really know what she's thinking. She's looking at this guy here, but has something, there's like a flower in her hand. I think if there was just a little more that lets us not be so confused about what's going on, I think it would be clearer that way.
Also, like the
Um,
emotional component of things, like they're equally spaced, these three characters. So like
yeah,
if there is like a story moment happening, the actual placement of the camera and these things are like very, very even. So it's not really communicating much of any kind of emotional thing abstractly.
yeah. Yeah. Oh, I just killed my Photoshop. That's weird. I don't think I've never used Pure Ref, and I wonder if it's like throwing off my Photoshop. I have to wait a few minutes here. Hang on just a second. I need to stop screen share for a second. Okay, that's going to be a couple minutes for my Photoshop to reopen.
Sure, no problem.
Yeah, I have a weird bug where it gets hung on the preferences for like 5 minutes before it opens.
Does anybody have any questions in the meantime? Let's see.
Oh, cool. Somebody posted the Greg Smallwood thread in the chat. That's great. Thank you. I can go back and I think I can keep talking about the Pure Ref open. I just don't have
Yeah.
Photoshop. I'll go back to the screen share. Yeah, I mean, if Photoshop wouldn't have crashed, I would basically just have tried to do a quick sketch of maybe rethinking of the placement of these characters, thumbnailing. But I think that we've talked about pretty much everything that that I would focus on here.
That'd be cool to see though.
If Photoshop opens any second now, I have a very jury-rigged version because I'm using like a 20-year-old Wacom tablet.
It
And
doesn't work with new Photoshop.
it's the problem is Photoshop. It's a combination of the old tablet, Photoshop, and the current Mac OS. Getting all three of them to work together is the problem.
Is it an Intuos 3?
Yeah.
Yeah, that's
Yeah.
like that's the golden age.
Yeah, and I just like the feel of it, and I've been using it forever. And I don't know how much longer I'll be able to because they don't really work together well.
I just got a backup Intuos 4.
Oh, nice.
Yeah, because yeah, this is starting to be like lost technology at this point.
Yeah,
Like
you
snatching
have
up.
to. I had to do like multiple drivers and then undo certain drivers to get the right one for this. It's really annoying, but they don't. I have an Intuos Pro also. It just doesn't. I don't like the texture of it.
Yeah,
Like I like the old smooth texture of
yeah,
these.
I've taken like I've gotten a new because I think they switch at some point. The old Intuos 4s were smooth, and then like halfway
Yeah,
through the life of the product, they switch. So when I got a new one, I replaced the like sheet over it because I could not deal with
yeah,
it.
totally. Yeah, It's really annoying. Let's see, come on, Photoshop. Still not opening.
Is this like you ever have an art director over your shoulder? Like, I can show you the changes in 20 minutes.
Well, yeah, what's weird is my computer is usually really stable, and like I haven't had a Photoshop crash in ages, so I don't know. And I had nothing open, which is weird. The only time that ever crashes is because I have like a 3 or 4 gig file open and it just freaks out. And I had nothing open right now. I don't know what's going on there.
Do you maintain regular work hours? Like how regular is your schedule?
Oh yeah, it's pretty regular, pretty regimented. I usually work well. So for the last couple of years was working just from home, and now it's a mixture. Photoshop is open finally.
Yeah, you should try
It's a
just to be
mixture.
safe. Like saving, you can click the image and save it out. Probably it's safer than copy pasting.
Okay. Yeah.
Unless
Um,
it could have possibly been like a clipboard thing.
yeah. Yeah, that's weird. So like right now I'm working
You gotta
at home
select
part of the week,
but
and
yeah,
then I got it, and then save as.
try it. Wait, you gotta do export, not save as.
Okay.
So save, export, selected image. It's the last one. Yeah.
Okay.
Thanks for. So sorry, you're talking about your schedule?
Yeah, let's see. Yeah, there it is. It's on my other monitor. So yeah, I think I keep a pretty regular schedule. Part of it because I've got pets, and like walking my dogs kind of is like the starter and end of my day. And although they need a bit more walking now that they're older, and multiple times to go outside. But yeah, I start maybe around from like 9 to 10 a.m. and then we'll usually finish anywhere from like 6 to 8, somewhere in there. Let's see. So, but yeah, work wise, I feel like that's helpful because I want to kind of have a stop time for when I'm doing work, and then I can feel like I don't need to kind of keep thinking about it. I want to do other stuff and then kind of come back to it later. Yeah, this is a tough one. I would sketch here, but also I feel like I need more info on like the intent of what's happening with these characters. Like what are they about? What's the
Sean, are you in the chat? Do you want to say a little bit about what the scene is about?
I mean, one thing I'm without knowing much else here, what I'm kind of doing is I'm turning this character away from us more because I mean I'm assuming you want him to feel mysterious, and I think if we actually show less of him, he might feel more mysterious as like a shape. That is like kind of one approach that I would take here. And
It's
then,
sorry, go
oh
on.
yeah, no, go ahead.
Okay, it's a book cover for a kind of fantasy novel set in a kind of Western setting. She thinks he's a threat at first, but he actually ends up being her protector.
Okay, yeah, so he's kind of like Aragorn in
Right.
the yeah, in the tavern in Fellowship of the Ring, which same thing. Like if you think cinematically, it works so well because it's such a silhouette driven shot, and then
Yeah.
lights his pipe, and then like you see his face. But in this case, yeah, I mean maybe you focus on having the silhouette up front that is, it's not our primary read. That's the other thing is you would, if you keep it more silhouette, then you allow her to be the kind of primary read, and she's like somewhere in here, And then really like, whatever he's doing here, is he necessary for this? I don't know. Like sometimes you're forced to put multiple characters on a cover just to sell the product and they need to show them all. If he weren't necessary though, maybe it is stronger because we get kind of her point of view is what we're responding to, and then there's a silhouette that she's sort of looking at. The other thing I would think about here is eye level of a scene. Like right now, camera is sort of like here because we've got this kind of receding back into space to him. So our eye level is like here somewhere, which is okay. I'm not sure if it does anything. I feel like if you were a little lower, it would be more intentional. Or if it is eye level, then if you want it to feel like an actual like realistic scene, that would move it more in that realm. Like if our eye level was here, but then you'd have to raise him up and you'd have to change a little bit of the background.
And it would do such different things. Like if you lowered the camera, you're looking more up at her. You raise the camera, she's going to seem like more threatened probably.
Yeah, and then I think with her too, like it's a tough one because you've got this element going on in addition to this element, and they're not exactly working together. And if the point is to show that she's distracted from it, then I guess that's kind of what's going on. Yeah, I don't know. This is a tough one because you kind of need a brief to work from to really like think through it. Multiple character compositions are always a lot to juggle.
And it can be a lot if a brief has like more than one idea you got to show. If it's like,
yeah,
we'll show her like approaching the mysterious stranger, but also you have to show the thing in her hand, and then there's a third thing. It's like any more than that, it becomes really cumbersome. That's why,
I feel like there would be a solution here too, where like instead of her leaning on this edge of the frame, like she's leaning on the outer edge, and then we get the negative space, and that allows this framework to be in like completely silhouetted, and you can almost go abstract with it. Maybe there's like elements that are broken, and then you've got different shape element in the image that you kind of like. I wouldn't even go beyond that really. I would start thinking about it in terms of like, it's going to be sort of this shape up here, and then how does she fit into that, and then he's sort of a darker value range here. And then using that dark range to be in front of a lighter value range. So there's a lot here you can stack with the value structure for sure.
And this is stuff that's much easier to figure out before you have any like detail, like you like getting the thumbnail to like convey the idea so that when you start actually adding stuff that
there's
not going to be any problems down the line.
Yeah, I think we'll just have to move on to another one. This is a very in-depth one.
Yeah, that was really cool to see.
Yeah, I think again it's just a lesson of like underdrawing, thumbnailing, lots of sketching. And that goes for a lot of things. The more you can figure out and use it for the problem solving side, the faster the rest of it goes too, which is what's great about it. You may do less rendering because you figured out so many choices in that early stage before approaching the rendering.
I think probably looking at that Austin Briggs stuff a lot would be really helpful.
Yeah. Does Pure Ref have a transparency to it? Is that why?
Yeah,
Huh.
it does a little bit.
Okay. It was, I was worried for a second that my monitor had burn in it. I've had an iMac do that before, where like white images left an afterburn.
Yeah, my phone is pretty burned in.
Yeah. Okay, these are really cool. This is great work. Great, very like solid stuff. So yeah, I mean, you're in the realm of like, this is what a computer render would look like. It doesn't know what is important. Everything's important on equal levels. I think like you just need your human touch here. And I'm not saying it was rendered by computer, but it's just so like the approach of it is you've given us everything in high fidelity. And now it's your chance to be the kind of the orchestra master of like where the strings rise, what falls back a bit. Maybe that's through doing atmosphere, hiding some of these mountains in low clouds, or using light and shadow. Maybe this ridge here is casting more of a shadow, and we lose some of the detail work in the shadowy areas. Also, I think like all this color saturations are at the same saturation point, and I think maybe either losing some of the warmth or losing some of the cool colors could help a little bit. They're just in such equal form right now that they don't have a priority. Yeah, I think just becoming a little less like refined is what's needed here. And this can be an issue when if you work in 3D a lot or are building a lot of 3D assets, but then you want it to look like an illustration later. It's always a difficult thing because stuff is in a perfect like 3D program fidelity. And I don't really work in that area a whole lot. So I
Sometimes
don't
I'll just
really.
repaint it from scratch. Like if I do a render like this,
Yeah.
I won't even want to use it in the image because it's like
Mhm.
there's so much, yeah, that I have to get rid of. And it can be like,
Yeah.
might as well just build it again from scratch and looking at it.
Hmm. Yeah, and I think as an image, this one's really cool. I think it sets up a scene in an interesting way. I think these shadow spaces just feel like they're missing an element. Like I don't believe that this is darkness. I think just because there's so much sort of uh kind of ambient bounce light happening that I don't know. I feel like we would see a little more detail, at least in the lower areas here. But I think there's like a concept and different elements for it. I think it's working really well.
I think it's also like sometimes it's great to go into 3D after you have like a painting and then use the 3D as a tool. So like for example,
Yeah.
you do a sketch and like you take it as far as you can and like the painting is working really well, but it's like, oh my God, how do I get that pattern, that like geometric pattern and the arch perfectly in perspective? It's like, okay, then go make it in 3D, paste it into your painting. It's like you needed it. You had a reason for
Yeah.
it. It's going to build up towards something larger.
Yeah. Yeah, definitely. And you can solidify your idea in that sketch phase too, and then the 3D will just support it even more. Like here, I start to question like, well, what is this building, or where are we in relation to it? I feel like we're in the back of it somewhere. Like I feel like the main entrance is up high around the corner, and this is like a back like fancy sewer entrance or something, but I don't really know. I think what's telling me that is like we're at some sort of like excess water level, and we've got all these rocks here, so they didn't care to get rid of them, but they still made a fancy intricate entryway system. Yeah, I'm just trying to like work through the storytelling side of it, and I think if you sketch it out more, you'll solidify that storytelling side. But that's always a good exercise too. Like show an image to somebody that has no idea what the story is and ask them what they can get from it. Like what does this tell you? What are elements are they reading from it? You know, that you can pick up different kind of cultural stuff. You can pick up different historical references and time period or like location stuff, but then also what's the point of the image? What do you want it to convey? But I mean, this stuff is like totally professional work. I could see this being in like a series of images for like a video game like location or something like that, like fleshing out like the whole area of like an Assassin's Creed map or something like that, where it works perfectly. So this image is it's pretty cool. I think it is the strong graphic element is working, but then I don't think that this rendering within it is working in conjunction. I don't know if you even really need so much of the rendering. I think if you focus more on the silhouettes and the accuracy, like we were talking earlier, the accuracy of like the posing, I think it would take you most of the way there.
Oh, he added some info on the chat. He's saying this is a personal practice piece working off of the Magic the Gathering Hidden Strings brief. The
Oh,
value
okay.
of lighting. Do you know what that means? I don't know what that means.
Not exactly, but
The values, lighting, scenario, and composition were a pain point.
yeah, I think at this point, you know, if you're not happy with it, I would, you know, you may have spent a lot of time on it, but also I think you have figured out enough of the image that if you approach it again, you would go through it so quickly because you know how you'd want to do it better. That's always a good practice for people too, is like sometimes in classes and stuff, we would be looking at a person's piece and I'd say, well, let's just stop working on this one. Now open up a new canvas side by side and redo it, but do it better, knowing like you've already worked through it once. What instead of continuing to mess with this one, what would you do differently? And just start on a fresh one. And that way you're not chained to the of like banging away at stuff that is like trying to form into something and you know you can do it more accurately again. And in that case, if you open a second canvas, maybe you focus more on the silhouettes and getting the gestured read of the two characters because they're kind of the primary focus here. I don't know if you need this kind of like Dutch angle. I'm not sure what it's not really like, maybe it's like too far gone. It's because I'm looking at it and I'm like turning my head because I'm trying to glean information from it too much. You know, and if you, it needs to read without turning your head. I think you're doing some cool stuff with the color palette. I like this kind of like muted teal with like kind of the purple tones coming in. I think that stuff's working fine. I think it just needs more focus on the shapes. And I don't know if you need this like photo textury stuff at all.
Yeah, I feel like the exposure doesn't really allow for that. Like there's such
Yeah,
darkness, any of that detail there like feels pasted in because we wouldn't
yeah.
have seen that.
Yeah, another thing I've told people in the past is like look at like Mike Mignola's work. You know, it's something where it's stylized and graphic, but if someone needed to, you could do a realistic painting right on top of his drawings and it would still be amazing. But it's because like everything's in the right place and the graphic elements are there. Like that's this kind of stuff you want to look at and analyze, and how is someone like that doing it? Cool. I think, yeah, again, staying in the sketch phase a lot. I think we're going to come through that pretty much all the time here. These are some good studies, good exploration. So I think this approach works well for doing illustration studies, but it's not going to do you much in concept. You're going to want to draw more in concept. And because you're working through problems in that sketch phase, and also you're often coming up with things that don't already exist. So you don't have reference for a lot of it. So you have to really visualize it in your head and then visualize it through line on a character that you're visualizing as well. I always tell people like concept work is like juggling like a million balls at once, because you're not necessarily using reference for everything. And when you can, you do, but you have to think about the character, the posing, the actor, and there's sort of like gesture, and then all the materials too, and trying to figure that all at once is a lot to kind of jump through and not leave one behind too much. But this is all good study approach here. I think the next step is more fine-tuned drawing. Maybe, I mean, I'm with just looking at just these pieces, maybe you have some where you've done that as in the past, but right now these are kind of your good like jump start to that next level up of doing a tighter drawing or like a more fine-tuned drawing. And it looks like you have good handling on the color. Lighting is really good on this one. I think if this were drawn a little further, this lighting approach would work pretty well. The color palette's working all right. Okay, as you say, improve your painting skill. Well, I think to improve your painting skill, you need to draw more, and I think that will improve your painting skill.
Yeah, like the values and everything look pretty good. It really,
yeah,
the limiting factor is drawing.
Yeah, I think that's it. Just draw more and use what you've been doing and apply it to the drawing. Oh, this is cool stuff. These are great. So this one, this is like a 3D build and like a render here.
Yeah, I can't tell if that's photos or
It looks like I don't know. It's really good. It looks like a 3D render with the kind of the grain of it, but I'm not exactly sure.
I like how the grain really integrates everything.
Yeah, it looks great. This image is great. I think what makes me think it's 3D is because it has more weight to it, and then this doesn't.
It's a cool idea too. Like you like hiding among the lily pads. Like I like how the narrative component that's really coming through clearly.
Yeah, it's a really strong image. Really, really nice. And then with this one on the side, this character, I think what doesn't work as well here is things feel like we were talking about earlier. I think stuff here feels the same texture all over. And also this guy doesn't have the weight to him. Like I feel like you can just kind of like pick him up. Like he's just weightless, like air, like all kind of like fluff. And so so that's the problem here. It's like, how do you apply weight to like a character that has a lot of gear on him and feels like a larger kind of humanoid. And a lot of that is through the gesture and how they hold themselves. And then I think it's also kind of unclear because it feels like there's a staff or weapon or something here that we're not seeing. But I think finding a pose, maybe it's a little more of a contrapposto pose, or like leaning onto one foot more than the other to kind of show the gravity of a character in a scene will help. Even though we're not seeing a scene, I think seeing the effect of gravity on a character is really helpful.
It feels like a lot of like the elements are evenly spaced too. Like in the lily pads one, you get this rhythm to where specific points of
Yeah.
interest are, and the other one, it's just kind of like it's like lined paper almost, like it's even
Mhm.
increments.
Yeah. I think the concept's interesting. Like, I guess it's like a Santa Claus as like a warrior or something. It feels like. Uh, I think it's weird. I mean, I think this stuff's kind of cool. I wish it was a little more resolved and less of like a layer effect kind of feel, but the approach to kind of detailed leather is really cool. The giant buckle here is really distracting to me. I mean, partially because it feels very flat. I want to, and also his vest as well kind of feels very flat. I wish it felt like it was wrapping around him more. Uh, like I don't know that we need the negative space here. I feel like he would feel bigger if we didn't actually see that negative space. Try to copy again. Let's see if it works. Okay. This is something I do on my own stuff all the time. I will like chop things up and move it around. If I don't need to keep it in a tight like layer system, then I won't. Or I'll do that later after I'm happy with pose or gesture. So here I'm just really chopping it up, kind of moving things around a bit, seeing if I can get it to feel like it's in dimensional space a little more and has a little more gravity to it.
There's also those tangents with the beard things and the buckle, the way it was
Oh
before.
yeah,
It's always something
yeah,
to look out for because that's going to kill depth like immediately.
yeah.
So you're thinking about the silhouette right now, like not having things, like having everything kind of conform to a larger shape.
Yeah, and I'm just trying to get it to read more spatially too. Like, let's see.
Yeah, it feels more solid.
So the stuff I'm kind of thinking about here, if like we've got his head, kind of the angle of it, and I want to have it set back so we feel more of his spine, like kind of leading up to here. And then if we kind of, even though we're not seeing it, we can understand what is going on with his posture. As opposed to here, it's like so up and down, just straight up, straight back, you know, what's happening here. And so I'm just kind of like setting his head further back helps a lot too. I think that's one of the biggest things here is like moving his head back so that we get this sort of shape in front happening more, where it feels like it's coming forward, this sort of momentum, and then we can kind of build off of that. And then I would maybe even move his heel back to here a little further, maybe. I'm just really kind of thinking about this sort of gesture. And then how do you layer all of that on top of it? And then, you know, it gets it more realistic. And yeah, that's kind of like the next step to make it feel better. And then just like little things design wise, I would think about like what is the edge of this? I'm not sold on the idea of this white tunic underneath it all. I don't know what it's doing. It's weird because it's like a cool white next to these sort of warmer ones throughout. I'm not sure it really does anything. I would consider like changing it entirely, and letting it kind of be in the background a bit more. Maybe it is like a slightly darker reddish tone than the outer jacket, and maybe it has like a pattern to it or something. Something that lets it be more of a secondary element, but just doesn't distract from this, lets all the white elements pop more. So the second you cover that up, now the trim of his coat and the fur on his boots is a design element. And that actually like feels more intentional now. So
Yeah,
again, we're using contrast to really help design.
and someone mentioned before, like, how do you practice your compositions? Like, this is the same exact thing as composition. This is just
Yep.
in the context of a character. But if you're composing a picture, it's the same exact method in terms of thinking.
So at this point, the only other thing I would have to sit and think about is like, how does this connect? Like, does he wear it over the vest part? It's very loosey goosey right now. And especially if it were like a live action thing, you have to really think about, you know, where is there a giant strap over this to hold it all in place? And if so, what does that do to change things? Yeah, shoulder pads are always tough structurally. Yeah, okay. So we've already taken it pretty far just from that initial. Let's look at the start, and that's where it's at now. Just kind of, yeah, a little more there. I think the design color wise might read a little better. The other image is really cool too. Good stuff. Okay, things start to get stiff when rendering out. Well, again, this is like a drawing thing. I would spend more time drawing, and then that'll make rendering um, more approachable for you. I think there's a lot of weird stuff going on perspective wise, but I like the lower angle, but also I don't, because it's like such a low angle, we're not getting a read on scale of other stuff. So it becomes unclear whether or not this is like a human sized person or a giant sized person next to like a mausoleum. This one, I think just a lot more drawing would take you a lot further, sketching it out, planning it out, and then, kind of tackling each part of it. It's a lot. There's a lot to this image. Figuring out and when you get to rendering, like, what is your light source here? What's lighting this character? Is it moonlight, or is there some form of technology here, or torchlight or something else? Watch out for like things like this one. This obelisk back here is on a different ground plane, so it feels like it's like falling over, which also makes it feel like it's next to a very large structure. There's a lot of stuff going on that's a little confusing, but again, things you can figure out in a drawing stage.
I think you'll find like when you solve the drawing, you don't even have to worry about rendering. Like it takes care of itself.
Yeah. These are really cool. It's good stuff. I think this stuff is done really well. I think it's really professional quality work. The part I question is some of the fine tuned choices of clothing to convey like a time period. It's really like the time period is really unclear to me. And um and some of the choices feel a little arbitrary. And I think with like a little more preciseness to clothing choices and preciseness to the project itself, I think that was what would just take this just a step further. Like it clearly reads as like mob character and different outfits, and which is great. The initial read is there, and then from there it's like I don't know like what time period or where this is at. And I think that you could embed a little more of that in the choices.
Somebody asked, would that happen in the research stage?
Yeah, it's being very comfortable on your own end of like knowing the material a bit more. And I feel like this is just not quite not quite knowing all the material as well as you could. And this is like I've done some projects where I was working on a project that was all like bikers in 1969, and I somewhere on the internet I found full catalogs from 1969, like clothing catalogs, and I would shop for the characters from these clothing catalogs. Like if it was not a biker but like the rest of the people in the world, like there was a woman, she was a journalist in this set location, and I clothed her from a catalog from 1969 just to make sure like stuff was pulling from that era. And then some of it I would change a little bit, but make sure it still felt like right from that book. I think stuff like that is where you can get those the next level touches to really sell.
Desperation sets the man, and it's
Oh.
good. Let's check.
Sorry about that.
Everything else is good, is working well. Pretty good gestures, good kind of character feel to them. I think it's really solid work. I think this is kind of where you want to find out what you want to push for yourself. I mean, that's what I would push for myself on something like this, but you know, maybe another thing to push would be rendering level and quality of different rendering. Maybe you can do more with less rendering. Maybe you can are you commenting? There's a main problem. The initial idea getting lost until I finish the project. Yeah, solidifying the idea. And sometimes that happens later and you kind of come back around and you know, rebuild on top with a completely solid idea. But I think it's really good work. Okay, so characters are the same but from different parallel universes, each with their own style.
This reminds me of the Slav epic.
Yeah, totally. This is good. This is good. Really fun. And it feels like you're well versed in different stylizations too, which is fun to do. I you know I like this line one up front a lot, but I wish it was taken a step further. I feel like it feels like, even though it's well drawn, it feels like it feels like a weak point in the overall image to me. I think maybe if there was some more like variation of, maybe like if the line color was different at different points of it, like maybe it's not all black line in each area, like maybe the line on this headpiece was like a different tone and different color than black, or maybe if you know the line around the face wasn't, the profile line wasn't, maybe if that wasn't black, if it was like just an off purple or blue or something would be interesting. It's something a lot of like different comic book artists do, where they maintain their line work and will switch up the color of it itself. And then maybe it doesn't need such a strong gradient. Maybe if the gradient were a little more subdued, it would be working with the flat kind of feel. That's a cool image, and I think it's working really well. This is one of those ones where I would stop looking at it for a couple days, come back and look at it fresh, and then like circle stuff and say like, I want to address this area, this area, this area. Like right off the bat, I feel like it gets a little dark and lost right in here. And maybe there's a way to, because this element feels like so much in front of everything else, you could pop the flag out a little bit more. And maybe this dark area doesn't need to be so dark. And you could still allow this section to still feel like it pops with light. This dark here kind of competes with the dark of the cliffside down here. Maybe if it were more of this blue instead, like you could. This is one where I would use like lighten layers and darken layers and play with it. I don't know if people use those very much, but like here, it's a good way to just kind of lose stuff really quickly.
Yeah, like fills in the shadows of atmosphere.
Yeah, there.
Yeah, that helps so much.
And you can even kind of get a little bit more in here. This is what allows you to choose where the dark areas are going to pop. It keeps you in control and stuff that doesn't get lost in kind of muddiness or like too much happening.
The character with the flag feels like very heavy. I feel like it's taking away from the central character a little bit.
Yeah, you could do again, like use a lighten layer and kind of
Yeah, that helps because it already has so much contrast because it's so different than anything else. You don't really get a value on top of it.
And other things like soft light are really good for this sort of pass later on, where you want to kind of play with some of the values. Like here, I can bring a little more of the magentas into this without obliterating the structure at all. And you can even do a thing here at the, sometimes this is really cool on an image, just like a light gradient, kind of like to just drop some stuff back a bit. Maybe that's too harsh, but you can turn it down a little.
I
And
like
then,
yeah.
oh, go ahead.
I was gonna say I like how it now keeps the focus on the character, and then you have like all these other things to explore instead of it all competing with each other.
Yeah, and I think also with so much stuff going on, we can keep this sort of momentum, this movement happening, like this sort of stuff, and just kind of like reinforce the directionality of it all. Like a nice flow to it. I do one other thing to it. Play with this a little bit. By making this sort of flat version, I'm just doing different things like color lookup and color balance kind of stuff. What I'm doing is really subtle unification. By doing those like broad strokes of like color data changes, like it's bringing things just all a little more unified. Like I kind of like how, and this is just, quick messing around. This is something you could spend hours on just playing with, but like one thing that just did now is it brought some of the warmth into this character's face a little bit, which unifies it a little further with the rest of the image. Because then when we look at it before, we realize, oh, that purple is one of the less saturated tones in the image, and then also I think that's what is separating this head from a lot of the other parts of it. A little bit of warmth in there unifies it all. This is good to do too, like look at it really tiny and kind of assess what are the instant read parts of it, and then go into those and kind of re-solidify or alter or change. Yeah, cool image.
Yes, it's very cool.
What else to say? Yeah, a lot of fun.
We're coming up on 2 hours, basically whatever you have time for.
I could keep going for a bit if people want to hang out. I think we
Yeah,
can
I'm good to see more.
try at least talk about all of them. Maybe see where we go. I think we'll get to a lot of the same feedback on quite a few where it's draw. This is a fun concept. I think it would be more successful with stronger drawing. And you could take this idea, doing this one, I feel like you could work on top of it, but I feel like you could almost get further starting a separate canvas right next to it and starting from scratch, but have the mindset of like, well, let's do it right this time, or do it better this time, and go from there. And look at, you've already got your kind of your groundwork there. It's like a roadmap, right? And you can, in the new one, your roadmap, where you're going, so you can make those choices with intent this time. So you know that the fish head is going to be over the shoulder. Well, maybe I want to overlap the shoulder more because then we'll feel more depth, and things in front of things help solidify that. Or maybe I want the fish head to be 25% larger. Maybe it'll feel better that way. So ask yourself those questions as you're looking at your own work. And that's illustration in a nutshell. It's like being your own critique, like looking at it and critiquing it yourself is where you get things going. And especially once you're working professional, I mean, other than asking friends for critiques, that's what you're doing all day, is looking at your own work and asking yourself, well, if I did this, would it be better? Or what would be a different approach for this particular part or this solution? And then, so on that second one here, maybe you've got the idea of like, okay, the gesture is kind of there, I can kind of like fine tune that a bit. I would maybe think about this foot, getting that foot to work better in space. But the simple sort of S curve of the gesture is pretty cool. But to solidify that, what's the dress design? What is that fabric? How's it fall? What are the folds of it? There's like a shirt underneath it? How does that, what's the cut of the collar? What is the fit of the sleeves? All those are little mini questions that will build up to the finalized drawing of it. And then another question you might ask yourself, okay, so if I want these water, I don't know if they're bubbles or actual liquid water spheres. Is it actually like floating water? But in either way, you want to think of, well, how would I paint that? And is it better to have a lighter value canvas or something like that? Because then I'm able to show them as solid water shapes in front of a lighter background. That might be helpful. And maybe you try that approach, or maybe the background is slightly darker because you need the white of the fish to continue to pop against it. So again, just all these different questions, you're looking at each little element and trying to figure it out. What's the depth of the fish body itself? How does it wrap in space? Right now, it feels very flat behind her. It doesn't have the kind of curve it could have. And if you don't want it that way, then you have to watch out with your rendering style, because if you want to render things more realistically, but then you use a stylized approach, that's mashing two things together, which takes a lot of finesse to do properly.
How do you keep the energy as the illustration progresses?
One thing I really like to do is when I do my sketch that I'm really happy with, and sometimes the sketch I will spend a ton of time on, sometimes more than the final even. But that sketch that I'm really happy with, I keep as a flat layer at the top of my PSD, just turned off. So I can always flick it back on and off and see if I've lost anything along the way. So if it's like a character gesture or like an initial underdrawing or something like that, that's always at the top of my canvas, turned off, and then I will flick the eyeball to see it again and compare. And then as I work on stuff throughout the day, I will often save iterations at the top too. and have them turned off of view so that I can kind of flick them back and forth and see if I like all the stuff I've been doing to the image. And if I've gone astray at any point, then I will say, no, I need to pull back because I lost this part before. I lost this movement or this like element that was working. And I think that's one way that you keep your work feeling like alive and fresh and not overwrought. And in that kind of like rendered, but still coming from a drawing or sketch kind of phase. Let's see, this guy, this is pretty cool. Another one where, you know, more drawing would help, but it's there's definitely like the potential there. I see like the elements happening. I think you could heighten maybe the acting side of it a little more. I think the realism could be pushed further. It's I feel like you've got the good idea and you're looking at this and like it's overwhelming. Probably there's probably like too much here to take in at once, and it might be out of your what you're usually used to doing. I think in that case, what I would do is if the character's on a separate layer, just put a flat background on behind him for a while and just work on the character. You know that there's going to be balance light from the fire, so you can keep that in mind. But you could really fine tune the character themselves. And I think right now, like the scale is great. Like it feels very realistic. Proportions are good. Rendering's okay. I think it just feels unfinished. But before going further on the finishing side, I feel like the drawing aspect could be heightened a little further. Some of the storytelling, like what does the pose tell us? Not too much. We're getting most of what we know from the face and the fact that he's wielding a knife, and that the garb is telling us he's injured. But could his pose tell us he's injured? Like could the pose have him feeling a little more like he's limping, or like maybe that one arm is a little more immobile? All of that would heighten this sort of posing of him a little further, and that's something you could do, and then continue with rendering on top of that. I would ask, well, if he's all beat up, what could you do to the jeans to make them consistent? Are they like torn up and battered? Is there blood on them? You got kind of the blood on the shoes, so you're already thinking about that a little bit. And then once that character's solidified, you can start thinking about the rest of it. What is the texture of this asphalt? How much of this background do we need to see? If this is just personal work, you can get this car in here on fire, but maybe it's more interesting to put it further back in space, like he's already walked like 100 feet away from it or something. It's just very competitive in terms of image space with him, that I'm not sure that we need it. If the image is about him, that can be more secondary and can be a little further back. And you could also play up that kind of atmosphere of the scene that way too. Like there's like a blanket of fog, but when you still see this like fire illuminating through fog in the distance, and it would make it feel creepy too. So if you want that cinematic vibe, you want to look at, scenes that might kind of feel similar and like the vibe of how you would approach it. Real quick, like here, like thinking about showing stuff in distance through fog, or what is here's something where we got fire in the back and kind of secondary read. Black and white films are for everybody. Black and white films are great to look at for composition and value structure, because they're forced to make things readable in just that value range. And a lot of this you can apply to full color paintings. It's a simple staging of things and getting silhouettes to read. Oh, here you go. You could take an approach like this and have that car on fire feel like it's in the same spatial range as this guy, the second guy on the horse here. Step back a bit from this character, and that would just make the scene read more and add some more dynamic cinematic qualities to it.
I get the sense that maybe like some of the reference was making the decisions in some of this, like maybe the
Yeah.
genes feel a little bit separate. Like, let's remember that like you're in control of everything. You're in charge of the drawing, you're in charge of the values and the composition. And then all reference will always just be if you need any kind of extra information in support of that. But yeah, these problems are often best solved just like from your own head. And I think it's always good to have like faith in your ability to solve those problems.
Yeah. Cool. This is fun. I like the lily pad hat. It's a good idea. Stylized characters are really interesting because they're very difficult to do. They're not exactly simplified, they're refined. And you refine them by repetitive drawing, I'd say. And um, figuring out like the essence of a shape that becomes like a character head or something like that. This one is pretty close. I think like it could still go through more of that kind of stylization refinement. And I don't know that the rendering style is helping you here. I think it's pulling you back into that kind of realistic, and it's causing issues, I think, with the approach. I think there's a way to get both going, but maybe like not thinking about rendering for a while and only focusing on the stylized drawing side of it and design of it would get you further, and then come back in with the rendering later on that. It makes me think of like Rango or something, where you could look at that and find a good solution where realistic textures are applied to a stylized character design.
I love that lily pad cowboy hat. That's such a cool idea.
Yeah, the hat's great. I don't know about the echoing of boots. I'm not sure about that as like little spats, but maybe if you found like a concept of like why he would have spurs, like what, like does he ride some other kind of creature? Would he have like a different version of like amphibian spurs, but they're not like metal? Would there be some other, familiarity to it, but you could find another in for an interesting concept, like you found the in for the hat by using the leaves. You could continue that kind of thought process throughout the rest of it. If he has that, then what are his belts made out of? Would they just be leather and metal? But why would he do that if he has like an interesting approach for the hat making side of it? And then I think like the straps here on this back thing are a bit of an afterthought. The construction of the whole device here, I think could go through another phase of really thinking it through. What are they made out of? Maybe they're rubber bands. I'm not sure, but like if that were the case and you want things to feel like a miniaturization, then continuing to build upon that, like how would they be affixed to it? You want us to see it and know that it's like miniaturization in that case. I think what's cool about it is that hat, and it makes us want more from the rest of it. Uh, and I think it's just fun. I like the face. I think he's fun. Feels a little more salamander to me. I'm not sure if that's. I guess maybe his. I'm not sure if he's a salamander or a frog. That's another question. And then solidifying that answer would be helpful too. I guess it says frog cowboy, but he doesn't feel like a salamander to me. A salamander without a tail. Cool. This is interesting. I like the handling of the face quite a bit. And then it kind of gets more, I mean, it's more chaotic throughout the rest of it. Like it's figuring itself out as you're going through it. But I would, whenever possible, this sort of approach is really nice here where you're letting things be a little more like you're loose, but you're also not chaotically like outlining stuff. You're letting the marks of the pencil kind of build form, as opposed to just using the lines as gesture and re-solidifying shapes. Like I think you can lose a lot of this outliney stuff. That's like it's a natural habit that I mean I've done tons of that, and it's something to kind of unlearn and kind of like know when to kind of let go of it. You don't always have to outline everything, and you can kind of let stuff breathe a bit more. But it's just like sketchbook time. That's great. Experiment. You want to do that so that you know where to pull back from. It's good to push as far as you can in a sketchbook and then refrain from stuff later, or find stuff that works and then reuse that elsewhere. But whatever you're doing here on the face is looking really good. I'll continue to find that approach and apply that to more of a figure.
Something that jumps out to me is that every body part seems to have its own horizon line. So like the viewpoint is changing for each thing. It's like a sign of like piecemeal seeing. So it might be good to practice just like really simple figures with one horizon line, like in one perspective, before kind of adding the detail on top of it.
Yeah, definitely. And sort of on a tangent, one thing that I've always found helpful in figure drawing, it's and I can't remember where it was, a teacher or someone talked about it when I was a long time ago, that when you're doing even the gestures, get the feet in, because even just a little mark underneath a foot it gives us a little hint of a shadow, and that grounds us. It grounds a character. Even if we're not seeing, like we were talking about the Austin Briggs earlier, even if we're not seeing the room or the floor, but grounding the feet on a plane that our mind will fill in the rest, immediately grants gravity to a character. And so in this case, sure, you ran out of paper space, but also the figure's too long and other stuff that's going on. But in general, when you can get the feet in and ground the character a little bit, you'll immediately start seeing, oh, that character looks like they're falling over, or I didn't get the gesture of this character quite right. And it's super helpful across the board. And that's why, yeah, if you're ever doing like figure drawing, just try not to let like the drawing fade off at the knees or below the knees. You want to try to ground the character, ground the figure. This is cool stuff. I think the rendering is competing with the stylization. I feel like you could lose, like I feel like you could render this with just like 2 or 3 levels of value changes and not 15 value changes. At least in the middle two, the middle one, there's a lot going on with like the value of these like hanging pages, unless they're catching the light. I'm not sure why we need them. They distract us from the interaction of the characters. And also some of the shapes feel like a little unthought through. I think you gotta, even if stuff's an abstract element, you want to think of how it affects the image. And especially in this case, you've got a lot of framing devices in this image. And so you really want to think about the shape of those framing devices.
You probably frame the hands in the light too, like you have it set up. So you can move that hand over to the right.
Yeah, and this like finger is perfect, but it's like right there against this
it's got
same value. Like just like over just a touch, or I really like the gesture of this hand. I think that's great. And this part of the image is working well. That's really cool. The acting is there, and like you've got him kind of reaching for it. That's a good idea. I think you need to start from there and think like each layer out from it. You know, how do I continue to support that idea and solidify that idea of the image? Everything else is sort of secondary and tertiary to it. Adding details is nice. Like I like that you're populating this kind of hut or little merchant area with more storytelling elements. That's great. That's a great thing to do. And I like the variance of it. I think it would work better if the structure was a little more thought through. It's like kind of like decorating without understanding the room. But again, like, this image is really complicated. There's a lot going on, and I feel like you may be tackling too many things at once. And it's a matter of finding an approach that allows you to work on each part, kind of piecemeally, and then kind of coming back through and unifying it all later. Character sheets are really cool. I'm not sure about the rendering. Like the value range, I think, is too drastic. I think this would be more like, I think like something like this is more successful to me, where it's the flat tone with this line work. It just feels stronger, feels more akin to this character than this sort of like rendered, but it's, you know, you got ambiguous shadows and then stuff in light. I think you could, I'm not sure that that's working as well as the flats.
I think one of the benefits, like why you would want to render as like a tool, is that you can show different materials like with those value ranges. But it feels like your materials are all again kind of the same. It feels like kind of a clay, and
Yeah,
it's like if you're going to use one style over another, you want to know why that would have advantages.
yeah. I think too, and you know, one thing, if I don't do a lot of work in this realm, but like something I would do if I needed to do a character like this and I needed to have it rendered in 3D, I would look up reference of Pixar maquettes, where they've actually like sculpted it in 3D and shot photography of it. What does that look like? Or looking at all the amazing stop motion miniatures, and what is the photography of those, where you have a stylized character but it's done with realistic textures and realistic light because it's photography. And using that stuff as reference and applying the information you can glean from that to what you're doing, I think would be helpful. Or in this case, maybe your reference is more from 3D movies and animated films and stuff like that, but you still want to understand the lighting of things a bit further. Expression wise, there's a lot of great expression stuff here. I think the character, the face sheet's really well done. This one's cool with like the ideas. You're selling the idea well. I think it's getting lost in the rendering of the leaves. I think you could do them a bit more adeptly and focused if you maybe did a few pages of studies of fall leaves and like understood more appropriately how your brushwork is going to portray like the feel of a leaf. Right now it's like we get the idea, it's there, but it's not selling it completely. And also this ground plane is a little unclear whether it's like a crystalline pool of water, but are they walking from it? Or is it somehow the ground plane is reflecting? Oh, you got a question about the elaborate how the lighting was ambiguous in the character sheet. Was it simply because lighting was not consistent or the materials were not adequately suggested? I think it's the texture, and then also there's sort of like a uniformity of it where you've got your local color of green going from green plus white to green plus black. And I think you don't want to do that. it doesn't help the texture of it either, because it's the same across the board, so they're all the same texture.
Also, like the way that the green goes up in value a little bit, like I feel like I just want to knock that back and just get that kind of flat, like green that's coming through.
Yeah,
Feels like it gets chalky a little bit in the lights. I think probably limiting your values a lot would help.
totally. There's a lot here. Like I still feel like the drawing is more successful on the character sheets. Like things are all just a little rubbery here. Where I don't get that sense from where you have the line work. Yeah, it's like it feels very like the decisions feel very arbitrary on what's light and what's dark. I wish there's more consistency and thought through of like how, or at least I want it to feel like that. I'm sure you're thinking through it, but it's um a little more plotted out and done with like that approach. So like here, I'm just really like building more form in a realistic way. I don't know if you heard that, but that's one of my dogs snorting in the background. This is something too. I feel like these pouches are sort of, you could do them in a way where they actually like overlap more and become a shape design element. Like I was talking about earlier, getting this little bit under the feet here just immediately grounds this character, this like sketch I'm doing here. It helps me analyze whether or not it feels like it's standing, or the basic like structure that holds it up in gravity is working or not, and whether or not it feels like it would fall over. So and it's really interesting, like how something just as simple as like those little bits under the feet help you with such a framework of building on top of.
Yeah, the way they're indicated, their grounds at sunlock.
Yeah.
There's some discussion in the chat about how to avoid chalkiness. I was saying that, say for like a very diffuse material like the green cloth there, you really don't need to like keep jumping things up towards a lighter value and a lighter white to show light hitting it. Like often it's just the fact that there's a light side and a shadow side, and the light side you can really saturate with that light and make it look green, and any like extra values are going to kind of get in the way of that diffuse material look. Yeah, this is stuff I'll talk a lot about in my materials class. How to kind of use only a few values, like really starting in 2 values is a really big help for this kind of thing. And then when you add a few more values, how do you kind of keep those relating to the first 2 and convey a variety of materials with only a limited value scale? So I think a lot of the color problems are even caused by using too many values here.
Yeah, absolutely.
If you restrain the values in the cloth too, then you can put some highlights and shadows into the gold material there, and you can get like a completely new material. That face is looking really cool.
Thanks. I mean, and this is that approach too, where I think everybody should try this, where you've got your start point, and then you're doing another one, but you've got the opportunity to take a new approach on each part of it. You know, and you're not stuck like bashing over this, trying to fix the same thing again and again. I think this is a good exercise to kind of use your roadmap next to it, and then say like, I want to do it a little different this time. You know, of course, this is just my approach to it, but you could do it your way, and you know, find the things that you want to change about it. And then like something I'm doing here, I did that quick underdrawing of like a gesture. I turned the opacity down, and then on top of it, I'm doing another drawing. But in this case, I'm changing it from even that gesture. I'm using that as sort of a new road work. And then at this point, you could think about shape language and really like fine tune the shape choices in your, and this is what's getting to refinement. you turn off that initial layer and you're going to eventually have a tighter drawing.
I'm also noticing like you're thinking about the perspective and the form a lot in those first sketch lines. And like the hair is reinforcing the way that we're looking down on the head. And I feel like
Yeah.
some of that was happening in the line work sketches, but in the painting ones, we're not getting a lot of like cues for how the head is sitting. Like just seeing the top of the head like that, it conveys so much about
Right.
where we are in space.
I'm just going to do a little bit on just the head here of like talking about rendering. Get a little flat going first. And I don't do a lot of this kind of stylized stuff, but this sort of workflow approach would work pretty well. I don't know that I would use it every time, but doing this where you have your drawing and then underneath it, giving yourself a flat essentially to work with, whether it's by painting it like this or making a mask layer or some other form. Basically, you want your selection that you're going to be working with. And then in this case, I've painted it, so I'm going to lock it. And then real quickly, let me just kind of like put in some of the flat tones just for some quick differences. Let's get the eyes in there. I'm not concerned about lighting yet. I just want to get some like flat tones to work with. And this is also where I would think about shape a lot right now. I've been online, but right now I'm thinking about shapes of even just silhouette. Like I want to kind of like think, what is the shape going on here? And then as I'm doing it, it'll make me notice other things like, oh, I kind of want to accentuate this eyebrow a little bit right now. So real quick, I just want to pop it a little further. Just push that gesture just a touch. And then I think I want to push the detail around the eyes just a touch right now too. And this is that form of like juggling a bunch of things at once. And I know that I just want to do this real quick and then I want to get back to what I was doing. Okay, so now I'm going to go back to my flat. Let's get things just a little closer. Now, one helpful thing, I have this white background. I don't want it to be white behind here. This is just placeholder. So I'm going to put like just kind of a gray tone behind it for right now. Now we're going to go back to that flat. Now on a clipping layer above it, we'll have a multiply layer. And this is going to be just flat shadows real quick. So I'm going to use like a round brush. Let's go to like just like a flat, like light gray blue. And I'm gonna like lay this in really harshly at first, but thinking it really simple. And I'm like overdoing it intentionally right now. But I'm just like giving myself like three-dimensional, like cell shaded kind of like look, right? Now I'm just gonna turn the opacity on that down a bunch. And just leave that right now. That's enough to kind of leave for a little bit. I'm gonna just erase a little bit around the mouth. And I was doing it flat, and now erasing. Now this is where you want to decide if you want to have flat edges to your shadows or sharp edges to your shadows, or if you want gradations. So that's a choice you make. I'm taking like a soft edge brush right now, and I'm just gonna kind of like dial that down a little bit because I am trying to do it more in this approach where it is a little bit more rendered look. So I'm just gonna like soften some of the edges a touch. Now, the next one up, I'm going to do another clipping layer, but this one's going to be our light. And I'm going to do a linear dodge. Now this is representing kind of a warmer, let's say it's a warm outdoor light. So I'm grabbing this sort of brownish tone. You can see what that does really quickly over it in a harsh way. I'm going to turn it down first this time, turn the opacity down a bit. That's the nice thing is you can adjust this. And then I'm kind of pushing and pulling with like both painting and then switching to eraser. Maybe, let's just lay in the flats first on it. So if that's a bit there, let's like bathe this whole side in light. The point of this though is because I want to apply a realistic lighting technique to a stylized drawing. And by sticking with it, at least initially in these two sort of light and dark layers, I'm approaching it as though it's a realistic form. Eventually I would probably like flatten it and work on top, but this at least gets you in that ballpark of lighting this stylized form as though it's actually a three-dimensional form in front of you. And what's fun about this too is, you could do the same thing and think about, well, maybe the light's coming from the other direction. Let's do a different linear dodge, but let's do it from this side. And I can do the shadows later. I'm just going to play around with like lighting it from this side, or maybe it's backlit. Cool thing about the backlight is you get the ambient occlusion of the ears and some other stuff, which is really fun. This allows you to stay in that stylized realm, but play with lighting in a realistic way. And then, you could do another multiply layer, or in this case, maybe I'm just going to do like an overlay layer with like soft brushes and just really have it feel like it's like warm light kind of like wrapping around the character a bit. I can even like darken this part a touch if I wanted. But again, maybe that's too much value happening.
Is this something you would do for more realistic, say, Magic the Gathering work, or really just more for working with something that's going to keep some of the line work?
I've definitely started illustrations like with this method to get a lighting scene together. I don't stay in this mode for much longer. It's more just to establish it
Right.
in a uniformity. And I would do it for the whole character, of course, and then possibly like multiple characters, especially if there's like a unique light source, like a torch or
Right.
something in the scene that's like lighting objects, and you want to approach that light source to each object. It can be helpful that way. And then eventually I switched to just kind of flat painting over it. But it's definitely a good mode for underpainting. And again, it lets you like play with the different kind of lighting scenarios of something too, if you don't
That
exactly
backlight's
know.
really cool. It's cool how much that changes the character. It's like it's so
Yeah,
serious when you have this backlight happening.
yeah. And I think it's like a nice harmony of colors, because there's, it's a tough one where you got greens and kind of magentas and warm light. It's all kind of in this weird realm, but yeah, it kind of ties together pretty well there. Anyways, I think that's one way to approach it without getting lost in this like render mode side of it. I think you can do more with lighting than with the rendering itself. And then I think you could do more with the texture than this like very rendered approach. I think the texture is the rendering, the lighting is the rendering.
Yeah, I usually tell students like just take the word rendering out of your vocabulary, and like it's going to
Yeah.
happen through other things.
Mm-hmm. All right, I'll go back to the peer ref. So, okay, I don't know if a lot of your problems are coming from the drawing per se. I think the drawing is actually pretty well done. I think the drawing just could have been a little more interesting, in terms of composition and sort of the approach. But I think that the drawing, it technically is done really well. Yeah, I don't know. I mean, the arm lengths are negligible. That's all stuff you can work with. Yeah, so the color and value is definitely a thing here. It's kind of going in that a little chalky, like we're talking with the other one. And I think that's because we're getting too much information. I think I think this one is, you could really just determine, is this image, do you want it to be more about the light, or do you want it to be more about things in shadow? Like that's where your direction will dictate stuff for you. If there's such a sunset out here, I don't know that we need like all this gray ambient light inside. It doesn't do anything for the image. And so looking at reference of a person with an off-screen sunset lighting them would be helpful. And then I think you could probably play with the value of the exterior more too, because it's really close to the character. There's just a lot of value stuff here you could play with. Let's see. And that's all to say too. I think that there may have been I think there could be a more interesting drawing approach to it in the thumbnail stage. Not that this one's bad, I just think it could be more interesting. Her sense of longing or that part of it is pretty good. I don't know that the hair is like done in a way where I think you could accentuate the cascading hair in a more interesting way. Like if we actually saw, like if the hair is your value element on the interior part, framing it as like a medium value against like dark would be a really cool thing to play with. Like real quick, if we fill in the rest of the room with this similar tone, and then I'm going to mess with the whole thing. You could have a really interesting graphic element of this hair and like the end of it. And that becomes such an interesting element of the storytelling too. Yeah, and then the image is doing multiple things. And I think you can do it in a harmonic way where it doesn't compete with what's going on up here. I think you can have this lower area as some storytelling as well. So before messing with the rest of the image, this is just as a compositional add-on. Okay, now. Darken the middle range a little bit. So I'm trying to get rid of the green because the green is too much like her shirt or her dress. So I'm trying to differentiate that a little bit. Make it feel a little more like it's lit from outside, a little more of that off-screen kind of sunset. I changed the ground plane a little bit. I would also lose this line here. And then on her, I think you could start to get a little more of like cool shadows on her.
Are you just thinking about the perspective here?
Yeah, I'm just messing with stuff. And again, this is like kind of fine tuning a bit too late because this is all drawing stuff that would go in the thumbnail, but just messing with things a little bit, kind of moving things around to. I want her to feel like she's a little more in the window frame.
So it seems like if there's a theme, it's to solve bigger problems earlier.
Yeah, definitely. Yeah, this
I think
one there's a lot to it.
I think also like the window feeling a little bit smaller helps. It helps add to that mood of kind of being inside the castle, looking out.
Yeah, and I think this stages it so that things aren't so equal either. Like everything before, a lot of similar shapes. Like same. This part outside is the same shape of her, is the same amount of space as the hair, and by adding more to the frame, it changes the size variance a lot more, and you can getting more in this dark area inside. It can be dark, but you could even have, maybe there's candles already lit off to the side, and there's in this value range, there's interesting things happening.
And it's the exact same thing you did with the Santa Claus of like you unify the coat and then the trim stood out through contrast. And this is the exact same thing. It's the same principle now being applied to the overall composition instead of just the costume.
Right. Right.
That's why, like in art, you really only have to learn one thing and then apply it to everything else. It can help it not be so overwhelming.
Yeah, I think stay in that early phase because you're really doing cool detail work. Like the stone stuff is really nice.
Yeah, that's really cool.
Yeah, I think, and then just applying it to one that's applying that same care to the sketch phase is gonna like do wonders for you. This is a fun design. I think similar to the other stylized character, the rendering, I'm not sure how it's not quite meshing well enough with the stylization to me. And I think that would be an area to explore more through studies or like looking at references of maybe again like stop motion miniature maquettes and applying that kind of rendering style, like looking at that as reference and applying that to your painting here. I wonder if they have any of that stuff online. I'm sure they do. Yeah, like this stuff you could totally like have open as reference of how to light, how things are looking in light that are stylized. Or and this isn't really my area. I'm not super familiar with tons of the different films, but it's good source of reference. Like that grasshopper head was perfect reference for something. You got different materials, different kind of texture happening, the way the cloth looks in the light here. That little like shadow bit from the eyelid shape on the white of the eye. Or that's another eyelid underneath it.
Gotta brush up on your grasshopper anatomy.
Yeah. Yeah, I saw an exhibit of I don't remember which film it was. It was I can't think of the name of it, but they had all the maquettes from it. And it's just really cool to see them all in person. Because aside from toys, you're not really seeing like this sort of fidelity of stylized characters in actual like dimensional space in front of you.
Right. I would definitely suggest painting in two values because I feel like there's all the values are kind of going towards this middle gray. Nothing is really differentiated. And if you're going to study some of those maquettes too, like you can practice the line work to practice the volume, but then for the values, really limit it and only give yourself a few so that they really read as different groups.
And like one little thing here, this dark value background is not helping this character. It's too dark for the choices you're making here. Or it needs some kind of like gradient or something happening to it. I think it's just not working well. Or the choices on the character need to be stronger, darker, or richer, or something like that. Concept wise though, you're doing the right approach. You're doing lots of sketches, figuring it out. That's what you want to be doing. Figure it out in the sketch phase. Now it's a matter of practicing rendering, getting reference. Yeah, cool stuff. I think this design's great here. Really successful one. This is all good stuff and the right approach. It's I think it's like an incomplete sentence. It just needs like the last little oomph to kind of take it to finish. A little extra polish to like clarify and accentuate the designs you're making. Because it's a cool design. I think you've got some successful stuff here. And it could be rendering, but it could also just be drawing on top of this. Like this makes me think of like if you if you know Adam Brockbank is really amazing concept artist, and he does this great approach where it's not always rendered all the way. There can be some drawing. Pull some up. It's comic book drawing, essentially like black ink work kind of drawing, but the designs are really striking and finished in a way that this is just a little vague and grasping at wanting to be finalized.
That's cool stuff.
Yeah, he's one of my favorite concept artists. It's drawing based, and I love the drawing based stuff, of course, but it's fully realized and in a cool rendering way. It's not ultra like realistic, but all the information, there's enough information there that it's perfectly suitable for live action film stuff. Even these ones where they're kind of like flats but done in a realistic way. Right here, this is like a good side by side. So in this case, it feels finished because the line work actually is what finalizes it, and then the rendering here is just supporting the design through line.
Yeah, there's not too much contrast in the values where it's making the line work muddy. And I feel like what's happening is like some of the shadows here are starting to compete with the line work. And it's like the line work is not finished, the values aren't finished, and they're both competing with each other.
Yeah, totally. And then having that line work also, it shows a certain amount of confidence in your choices too. Not only in technical drawing, but in designing. Like you've made that choice. It is there with this line that accentuates it, that clarifies it to a degree where sometimes rough sketching and rough painting can leave the viewer a little left like, oh, I don't know, if you're not sure, I'm not sure. So that's what's another good thing about this type of concept art is you're giving the directors or producers something to look at where like you've done the work, it's clear, and that kind of carries through in helping decision making process. Now here's another good one. It's like realistic kind of textures applied to what is pretty simplistic approach of line and not too much going on value wise, and then a background that just sort of it accentuates the setting. Yeah, everything else is working well. I think it's tying it up together, finishing it off. All right, so you're taking this character design into a keyframe illustration, kind of like a riot splash image or something like that. I'm not sure what the angle is doing for the image here. It doesn't, like, it doesn't make anything about it. It's just a dynamic angle, but not for this pose. Like the character, she's pulling an arrow from her quiver at a low angle. I don't know if it works. I mean, it's something that like maybe in motion it would make more sense, like if it's a swooping camera, but for a one-off illustration, I'm not sure it is like coherent as a choice right now. I think you're also giving yourself really tough order with this like shape at that angle is very difficult to convey in space. It's reading kind of flat right now
That
of its
the bow and arrow
placement.
is like fitting inside that shape also.
Yeah, I mean, honestly, like this is a good, you tried it out. I would go a different direction with it from here. I wouldn't mess with this one any further. I think there's some interesting stuff, like actually like the way you've done the claws here is it's really interesting. It's like kind of like undulating like shape kind of repetition going around form, like that's actually like working really well. But I don't know, it doesn't serve a purpose in the image.
And my eye keeps going to the left where all that contrast with the circle
Yeah.
shape in there. It's
Yeah, I think you got to find a reason to do this angle. As a design, it's interesting. I wish the cape wasn't so weightless. Like if it's a bear skin, those are hefty. They're like heavy, thick. I think it like doesn't, I mean, I guess if it's like a stylized form of media, then you can get away with that. This stuff here, I guess, is this one? I don't know what the shape is here. I don't know the lighter green part in the back. I'm not sure what's going on there. I don't know what it's attached to. I guess it's coming off of the horn. So there's like a loop here, and then there's sort of like a head cape. Yeah, I think it just needs to be thought through a little more. The idea of like the snake head showing up inside of the bear mask is pretty cool. There's something there. I think I'm not sure it's fully figured out yet. And then I like the flat breakdowns on the arm here. I think this is pretty neat, the kind of dark tones and then the white and green on the hand part. But yeah, I think overall it just needs more clarity. Resolution of ideas. There's a lot of good ideas, but I don't know that they're all gelling together yet. Yeah, I think that's where that one's at. These are nice. The instant thing is that everything's the same size. Everything's the same shape, same size, same scale. Playing up shape variance will help immensely. Detail granularity, like contrast of large shapes versus small shapes. Trim, all the trim is the same size. Like everything's competing with each other because nothing is chosen as its primary shape or design. Maybe some of these it's about the intricate metalwork. Maybe it's not on the others. Maybe you have large plate mail in contrast with granular detail on or filigree on like the greaves. I think they're all pretty good in terms of conveying character. Like they feel alive, which is good. That's something some stuff doesn't always feel alive. I think there's life to them, and that comes through in the gesture, the faces a bit. I think they're a little loose and unresolved in the drawing stage, where I think you could, before you get into this value rendering, I think you could take that drawing, turn the opacity down, do one more drawing on top of it, with like a little more, maybe a little finer brush tip, or like a little more detail. And I'm not saying like covered in detail. I just think you could do it with like maybe like a tighter, slightly tighter drawing on top of it. And then go from there with the value below it. And then when you do the values, I would recommend sticking with simple value structure at first, maybe 2 or 3 values, and then going in with highlights and detail. If you plan out your kind of flat value range of like, here's the value range of the skin tone, here's like the one on the far right is probably the most successful because you have a value range of the skin tone and then a value range of this sort of dark leather. And then you're accentuating it with highlights. The rest are kind of in the same zone throughout, where it's like a little bit of light, a little bit of medium, a little bit of dark. You can, if you structure it more, it'll be more successful. But it's cool in terms of, if this were like a project, these are great of a great page of approaching rough sketches for like a character and figuring out where to go with that character. I think you're running through a lot of ideas, and that's always helpful to just kind of work it through and then figure out what's the best solution for the kind of character brief or problem you're solving. Good approach, and yeah, take this to the next step. Yeah, like you're saying, it's good, breakthrough in rendering, good experiments in rendering and trying out different approaches. And what I would do next is go back to drawing for a bit, and then come back and try rendering again on something that's a little more technically drawn, and see how you can bring them together. If you're working on your rendering side, now you want to elevate your drawing side and then come back and kind of elevate them both, and then they work together in conjunction. And if you want to simplify it for yourself, like this character on the left, what if you did a study of just a horn? Thinking about rendering like the texture of this kind of horn. You could find images of like goat horns or something like that, and then do a study of that. That's like another great way of finally focused on something, and that'll what you learn from doing that study, you'll apply it to everything else. And sometimes when you tackle like so many things at once, it can be a bit overwhelming. You'll learn a lot doing it, but also if you simplify your method of attack, you'll kind of learn more on that initial approach. Yeah, just keep going, keep drawing, keep painting. It sounds like you're having fun doing it, and that's great. Cool. Yeah, this is a good one where a silhouette is a good way to start, especially if we're not having like a face. If it's intentionally like a kind of dark void with the light eyes, that's great. Very like the PlayStation game Journey gives me that vibes a lot. I think if to make this like a step further, actually like rendering some of the folds in the cloth would be nice, or some representation of how the cloth would actually fold, like in the folded arm area here, or like a little indication of some cloth.
Very classic diaper fold opportunity there.
Yeah. And then, what is the trim? Is it just a flat tone, or is there like this is your chance to have, like I was saying with the other one, like a large shape, and then in contrast, you could have granular detail in the trim. And that's always a good way of like playing with contrast too, and in contrast of value, but also contrast of color, contrast of design, shape, and scale. Yeah, cool ideas and a good approach. And yeah, it feels like it's 60% done, and could refine from there and be a really cool concept. This is good. Yeah, good, including kind of reference stuff. The image itself, the full body's pretty flat, and that has to do with the drawing of the characters. So if the gesture was a little more solid, or you know, approached in the underdrawings phase a little further, it would not feel quite as flat. I think the neck is very confusing here. This whole like shadow under the chin isn't quite working with the neck and the lighting going on, but a little too much render, a little too soon. Again, more in the drawing and kind of figuring it out phase would help. Yeah, it kind of has that kind of arcane vibe. I would look at that. That stuff's great to look at for reference. They're doing a really cool mixture of dimensionality with stylized kind of paint quality and stylized shapes and textures. And similar here, it looks like you're having a lot of fun painting. I think if you had a tighter drawing and a little more done in the kind of drawing planning phase, that painting would just go even further. Let's see, yeah, advice on rendering is do more drawing, and then like we were saying with the other ones, the rendering will come with more drawing. Composition too. I think compositions you'll get more in just doing tons and tons of sketches. Value sketches too. They don't have to be line. They could be sketching with value and shape. If that feels more natural to you, because it might feel more like painting.
I think about where you're placing contrast too, because you have like, there's that branch on the right that feels like a circular spiral, and it's right next to one that's more of like a lightning bolt zigzag spiral. And like those are different, and that kind of contrast is going to lead your eye over there. But there's like nothing really happening there. I think it's the same thing happening on the left side of the image, where you go, those branches, they're really sharp against that depth of field background. That's contrast, and we're looking there. We're looking on the left.
Yeah.
We're looking last, like at where the figure is, what's happening with the with that fire bird thing over there, and like that's where you want to be. So place contrast where it's necessary.
I wonder if A10 did a really cool Gumroad some years ago. I wonder if he still has it. It was all about thumbnailing of environments. Oh yeah, there's images below, but this stuff, it's like great exercises to do. This is a bit more rendered here, but I think all these are, yeah, like this is like exactly what you'd want to play around with more. Yeah, sketching and compositions through value, structure, and shape, and it can be as simple as using, you know, it's used everywhere where you just like have things recede in atmospheric perspective, but it's a good tool because in this case that's the easy part, and then you're allowing yourself to play in that. That's like a playground, you know. Atmospheric perspective is like it's like a 1+1, you know, 1, 2, 3 of like equation here. You've got things get recede in value as they go further back, but what can you do with that? What can you do with like moving things around and make it dynamic, plunging depth, or making shapes feel curved or feel, you know, in scale? Like how do you play with that stuff? Because the atmospheric perspective part is the easy part, and then you can go from there. I think something like that would work great, and then you could play with that, and then go back to painting and experiment with your with the vivid colors that you're doing here. Awesome. I think
Is that
that's
it?
it on here. Yeah,
Cool.
I can stop. He sent me those, like I think there were 3 other ones.
Yeah, I might as well. a couple more.
Yeah, I've got those here. Supplemental. Yeah. Okay, these ones. Cool. Oh, this one is like a lot of the same stuff when I was talking about the Adam Brockbank stuff where his line work solidifies and finalizes it. And in this case, something like that would help. It's almost finished. I think what's pulling this one back is scale is a little off throughout it. Like the head feels a little small, or the boots feel too big. If you just look at that as a size variance, like this hand also feels a bit big, and like the arm itself feels either short or just not properly tucked in. And I'd watch out with just general shape things. And that's all. It's all accurate drawing. Maybe don't rely as much on the photographic textures. Maybe apply that. Maybe if you spend more time in the drawing and then use the photographic textures on top of an accurate drawing, it would work well. And I think, is that Peter O'Toole from Lawrence of Arabia? I think that's like a recognizable face even. Other things like the white straps here, what are they made of? That's like and it pops as part of a design element, and I think some indication of, is it thread, like, is it what is the stitching on the straps? Is it perforated? Like, what kind of, are they canvas, or what's going on there would help, especially because the second you start giving us photo textures, we'll need texture information on everything. Yeah, that pole feels really thick too.
Yeah, it's like if you get specific textures, like even the mountain in the background, like that's very specific. That gives your brain to latch onto, and then anything that's a little bit off is going to look really off because you're going to have that comparison.
Yeah, it's a tough one because like when I looked at it here, I was like, oh, this is good. And then as I get in on it, I'm like, oh, like it starts to fall apart, and that a lot of it is over reliance on photo textures on top of a drawing that could have been a little more accurate. As a quick read, it gets the job done, but it's not going to elevate to a higher level of image making. It'll just suffice to get the job done. But who wants to do that? You want to make it, you always want to get better if this is what your craft is. So yeah, more drawing. This is just lots of rendering, where I don't know if you need to render at all. I think the images are interesting. Like I think the ideas are strong behind them, and I think that it's a broken record, but more drawing here would solidify the idea even further. And I feel like because you haven't done that, you're going to run into problems later. Like you've rendered this and like, oh wait, what is this door frame here? What is going on with this here? I didn't think about that part before. It's a little too much of like building the train tracks in front of you. A little more planning. And it may be that you're just diving in on something that is a little more complicated than you might expect.
I think this is similar to the one with the car also, that I can see like the photo shoot almost.
Yeah.
I think like, yeah, you really want to have any photo shoot that you do like solve problems on something that's already working. and just for a little bit more specificity or something, and not really have that dictate the image.
Yeah. And like, yeah, to me, it read is like, yeah, I feel like you have some reference, like maybe using Poser or something like that. It kind of has that look to me, which is good to use the reference, but I think you're moving on too quickly from it. Yeah. It's like you're very eager to start painting, which is great. But hold back just a bit more, and it's that planning prep phase a bit more. Like you're so excited to paint the folds on the sash here. It's really cool. I'm excited for you.
Looks great.
I'm happy for you because you're having a blast painting that, and also like all the you're having a blast painting all the detail on all the stone. I just wish the whole thing was planned a little more. Like it's like it falls apart when you get to like, oh, the patterning on the ground doesn't do anything. I think lighting wise, it could be, stronger. Yeah, I think they're very good efforts, and I think you should keep pushing because you're gonna glean a lot from doing these. I can tell you're really focused and working on them.
Yeah, there's a really cool stuff here. There's a good like just feeling to them. They feel exciting, and
Totally.
yeah, that's a really important thing to have.
This reminds me, I actually in a folder I was looking at earlier, I have one where I was painting a similar sword effect. Yeah, here. And I knew, and this is, going in with the foresight of knowing that, okay, so there's a sword with this light effect happening off of it. I know that I need to have enough value that it pops. And so every choice is made to reinforce that, down to the decision, oh, these steps are red. They're not gray stone like the building behind here. This by making them dark like blood red, when it's just going to pop a lot more, and I can make that the focus of the image. And then as a second, I mean, she's essentially like primary 1.5, like the rest of the image is about her, and then using the billowing shapes to make an interesting moment in time. So that's another thing I'm always thinking about here is like, what is this moment happening and how to reinforce it? And then, in terms of rendering, I'm letting everything else sort of be a step lower, not quite as resolved. And that's, again, that kind of hierarchy happening here. So by the time we get to this background here, it's impressionistic and enough that, I'm not distracting the viewer by it. And then so that's like a good kind of experiment when you approach something like this. If you're rendering each one of these stones to the same degree of each fold of the cloth, aside from color, like what tells us this is, and aside from it being a character, it doesn't tell us that this is the important part of the image, where you're saying, well, this wall back here is just as important. I think there's a way to get there. Maybe if the lines weren't as thick, if the value range was crunched together a bit more, it wouldn't be as distracting. And then lighting wise, if you find some good reference to stuff like this, oh, this is like a field day of like bounce light. You could just have so much fun painting all the bounce light in here. Like I think there's a lot of potential to this image. It's just a very complicated one. You're overwhelming it with this like dark, smoky energy stuff. I think you could do that in a more elegant way. Which is the thing with like magic, is you usually do want to show it in sort of like unless it's chaotic, it needs to be sort of an elegant approach and thought through. The way the shape of it kind of blocks the arm here is a little too much.
I think you could show more of the shadow shapes too, like you can't really tell what weapons they're holding or kind of what's happening there. And that's the only information we get.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and that's great story. It's a great opportunity for storytelling. Yeah. A reference for the cape here would be good. This fold right here makes it feel like there's like an invisible person with their head underneath it. Yeah. Or last one here. This is really cool. This feels like Donato Giancola lighting. There's like a flatness to this background. Is it this? It's like a same thing tiled or like skewed. I wish there's just a little more like crunchy, like pockets of depth to this ground plane. It feels a little flat.
Yeah,
I think that
yeah, like confident dark shapes in the occlusion areas.
it would be as simple as a multiply layer and then just like popping in like crunchy little soft areas of where it feels like it will still feel like this floor is covered in arrows and swords and other stuff, but it will feel like it's not so flat and uniform. And I kind of wish that the figures had the same care and polish as all the birds and like the magic effect here. This character on the ground reads as a little flat and kind of and it's not as much care taken on the legs and the armor. And because of that, I think it starts to feel unfinished compared to the rest of it, where like this feels finished, like great, really solid.
That's really cool.
Really solid light, feels convincing, there's motion, it's very cool. It reads on both like a large shape, but then also on all the little granular detail inside of it. I'm not sure what this is. Are these gigantic like ballista arrows or something? And then this is like a banner. I think some of that stuff could use just a little tightening up of both an idea and rendering. So the directionality of the magic doesn't quite match her head to me. Like I feel like she's looking at something that's above and closer to us, the viewer, and then the magic feels like it's going more away from us. And I would almost rather see her facing that like direction of the magic a little more and make it feel like it's done with like more intent. I think part of that is that maybe you intended for the magic to be coming towards us more, but in rendering it feels like it's going away from us a little bit. I don't know. I think that would just add some extra clarity to the image if it was a little more unified of the posing of the character with the magic effect. And I think it's almost there. I think it just needs like a pass to kind of unify it. This one's cool. I think it just needed more drawing in the initial phase. It is weightless in a sense where it doesn't quite even, I can't quite tell even a moment of where the character's moving and flying. If you were to think about it more of like, if this were a scene in a movie, and where's the moment that you freeze frame it? What's the, do you want the most dynamic shot, or does it need to feel like this is the moment where the character is flying one direction but has turned their head and caught something in the distance that is their new target or new point of interest? In that case, like maybe it's the head is in a different orientation than the body, and the body was doing something, but it has yet to catch up to what the head just noticed. And like that could be your point of entry of sketching out the gesture of the character. And then also thinking through like, well, okay, if someone's flying, I you know, we don't really know for certain, but I would assume that they're not going to have their legs quite like this. I feel like the legs are going to tighten in and close in to be less drag for flying. It's the whole thing of like putting your head in putting your mindset in the mindset of the character. Like, how would you fly if you had wings, and what would it be like? How would you hold this? Is it, you have this giant staff? Is this loose grip actually going to hold it up? You know, we're just all in the kind of drawing and thinking side of it. The rendering's doing really well. The lighting, coloring, the rendering, it's all there. It's just a matter of staying in that designing of the image phase. Yeah, do you have any thoughts on this one, Devin?
I think you covered it. I really like the pattern on the cloth. It's like individual parts feel really cool, but yeah, like
Yeah,
the structure isn't there. Like the figure, the weight of the wings, and even the background too. Like the structure of the buildings feel a little like wobbly.
yeah. I really like this in the lower area, like the depth of the plunging depth of the building
Yeah,
here and
there's
here.
full-
It's up in the top section.
Yeah.
It doesn't quite sell it for me. They feel like they're kind of tipping towards me too much.
Yeah, I want
and
to really distort those back.
yeah, because if I cover up that, like I would love like the handling of the buildings in the lower section. I
Yeah,
think
the
that's
top
really
part makes it
cool.
feel like she's on a stage and we're just seeing
Yeah,
a painted background.
yeah. And honestly, like I don't know if you even need it. They could be sky and maybe silhouettes of some of the towers. I don't know if we need detail
Yeah,
back there.
yeah.
Like popping even and what you have the opportunity here. If you want the plunging like verticality of buildings, have mostly sky, some silhouetted towers, and maybe the little steeples with flags. But then you could even put cloud in front of it, and they're actually like plunging through the cloud like vertically. And you could play with scale that way too.
It would be
Maybe
cool. Yeah, sorry, go on.
oh, keep going. Yeah.
I was gonna say it would be cool to see like a little bit more narrative and life to the city, like maybe someone poking out of a window or like flags going between the buildings or something, or something to make it feel like a bit lived in, or a little bit about what the narrative is happening.
Yeah.
Because it feels like it feels like there's a lot of really cool individual things that's missing something that's adding it up to something larger.
Yeah. Like, I don't know if you had, if this is one you wanted to revisit, if you have that background on another layer, I would rethink the figure. Like you could keep the buildings in the lower half, and I think you could do a drawing of that character on top in a more focused pose of like selling the moment and selling the intent of the character. And then I think the render would go quickly because you've already rendered it. You know how to do it. Yeah. And yeah, I think that's kind of where that one would be.
I would also like maybe more strategically pick and choose where you're rendering. It's the same with the other image too. Like you can definitely do it really well. Right now, it feels like it's just the front part of the cloth, but there's not a lot of detail like in the grip, like the part of the staff there.
Yeah.
Like that part,
Yeah, that's kind of arbitrary.
Yeah.
Not really thought through all the way.
So just deciding where you're going to place contrast through this kind of specificity. And the values, I think, overall on both of them start to feel like they could be grouped more. You get the nice silhouette in the front, but then like beyond that, I think you can have a clearer like 3 or 4 value read within that main kind of silhouette, because the silhouette's good for magic because it's going to read when it's small. But yeah, there's a little bit of like muddiness happening with the value groups inside of that structure.
Yeah. Yeah, I think if you made a few of those changes, I think it'd be like totally perfect to send to them as portfolio stuff. I think it's really, really close.
Yeah.
And I know for a fact that's they want to see characters in environments, because that's such a huge part of Magic the Gathering. And then you work from the world Bibles, and almost every assignment you're going to have some element of the world, whether it's already been designed or you have to work within that playground. But you're getting a story moment, you're getting a character, you're getting a location, and yeah.
Yeah, and just remember for materials, like you don't have to use a full range of value for every material. If you knock back some of those feathers and some of the skin, it's going to make the metal feel a lot shinier. I think like the stone and the buildings too, it feels like you're using a lot of values there when, and that's probably why you have to push the metal up, the highlights to be so bright and kind of white. It's so, yeah, it feels like it's like clipping a little bit in the highlights.
Yeah, I bet you could very easily.
Yeah, there you go, like reducing the contrast there.
And then, yeah, I'm just kind of like, and then you can even like I've just darkened a little bit of everything, but then you can erase it, and like, that really pops. Like pose wise, here's what I would do is I would bring this leg up, have the knee here in front of us. If you want to have a dynamic, like if the legs are doing two different things, the other approach is to make them paired and both going back. But if you have a posed knee up here, and then you've got your foot kind of in here, and then you can have the other leg kind of come back into a dynamic
You get that like extra
position.
too.
And yeah, and what this does is we're getting kind of the motion of this happening, and then this, and then the head is doing this and looking that direction. And then the angle of the spear, I would even like tweak just a touch to be more like this. If the point is there, this is just kind of like a natural feel for me. And that gives us our depth. And then the spear would be kind of here. And then this actually, what it allows you to have a stronger grip, one, and it also puts this arm a little more in front of itself and creates a little more natural depth. Because before it, we're seeing a good amount of it here, a good amount of it here, that actually like reduces the kind of naturalism of the pose. It's rare that we'll see like perfect amounts of every part of the body. And then here, this allows this arm to be a little lower. And then the other thing I would think about is where are the wings attached? It feels lower attached on this side than on this side. But if the spear is a little higher, you can kind of nudge it up a little bit, and then go with that area there. Just real quick, I want to experiment with this. I know I'm getting rid of painstaking detail back there, but I think by making it more silhouetted, you instantly will have more depth.
Yeah.
And you could still have indication of like towers and stuff back there.
Yeah, that really helps.
And then sky, and then if you really wanted, you could have like a little bit of like value even in front of it, of like atmospheric value that's in front of those buildings. And then all that's to say that you've got this like cool, like plunging perspective here, and you just want to use it. And in that case, you would, you're not drawing it, but you're thinking about like buildings that are like going up into space more, pointing up with this sort of directional intent. Well, cool. Looks like that's about it.
Cool. We did it.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Any
so
last
much.
questions?
Yeah. Anybody have any last questions? Do you ever draw with a pencil still?
Yeah, for sure. Maybe not quite as much, but because I'm mostly working digitally for work stuff. But yeah, it's always fun to kind of go back to the pencil and draw.
I think you said you're more available for doing like short things like this versus teaching a full class.
Yeah, I don't. Yeah, so there's a question teaching anytime soon. Not an actual class, but I'd be happy to drop in on a class that's going on a regular basis. Like drop in when I can. Be happy to hang out and just talk about stuff or anything like that, or do like reviews or paint overs and stuff too. I'm always more than happy to do that kind of thing.
Yeah, I think it would be cool to do more of this because yeah, it's really difficult to find this kind of thing now, to get like accessible information from somebody with experience. So yeah, I really want to thank you for making your experience and knowledge accessible. I think it's
Of course, I'm more than happy to. I mean, it's great for me too, because it's keeping me thinking, and
yeah.
it's just it's equally for you as it is for me, because it makes me think about this same stuff when I'm working on my own work.
Yeah, and I would encourage anybody to look at all the work that you see critically like this. Look and think about what the image is doing. Think about where is the contrast placed. And I think like that, giving feedback to people is a really great way to learn and to think more critically about art and bring it back into your own work. I know that I learned so much from teaching. But yeah, I think we can call it here. And do you have any where can we follow you on Instagram and Twitter?
Yeah, that's about it. That's about all I'm using these days, Instagram and Twitter. We'll see until something else comes along.
Which might happen.
Yeah, keeping my eyes open. Yeah.
So yeah, I'll post about the recording. If you want to follow the school Instagram at Underpaint Academy, and you can stay tuned to the website. I'll announce more classes. There's one class just started, but we got 3 that are coming up. Well, my class on value is starting soon. You could still get a spectator spot for that, and then I'm hoping to do more classes like for a spring term. So yeah, keep everybody updated. And thanks again so much, Wes. Thank you everybody for coming and submitting your work.
Thank you. Thanks everybody.